Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the shadowy alleys and sun-baked courtyards of ancient Uruk, one of the world's oldest cities, where the scent of clay dust drifts through the air and your sandals stick to the muddy streets. It's warm, it's loud with bleating goats, and somewhere in the distance, someone's grumbling about missing inventory. Because yes, this is the birthplace of receipts. You're about to spend some quality time with history's first paperwork, and you probably won't survive this without nodding off at least once. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the dusty lanes of Uruk sometime around 3 BCE. The streets here are not so much paved as they are politely trampled into submission. Around you, ziggurats rise in that charmingly geometric way that screams, "We invented math and we're not afraid to use it." You catch the scent of roasted barley drifting from a vendor's stall, mixed with less romantic whiffs of livestock and sewage, and realize this place might look ancient, but it's buzzing with the unmistakable energy of a city trying very hard to keep track of its stuff. And that's the thing. Amid the clatter of carts and squawking chickens, you start to notice the quiet rustle of bureaucracy. Men in robes, dusty, slightly sweaty, carry bundles of damp clay tablets tucked under their arms. Not for poetry, not for art. No, these are inventory notes, trade receipts, temple orders, the first forms of written documentation, and they are as dull as overcooked lentils. Imagine you're trying to run a temple economy here. You've got grain coming in, livestock going out, priests claiming divine need for extra beer. You can't just eyeball it anymore. Oral tradition is fine until someone forgets which goat went where and suddenly there's a fist fight behind the altar. So, they start writing. Not with pens. Please, we're not in Renaissance Italy, but with pointy reeds pressed into soft clay. You press, you mark, you bake, and voila. You've got the Mesopotamian version of a CVS receipt, just with fewer coupons and more threats of divine punishment. You pass a scribe now. He's squatting in the corner of a marketplace, stylus in hand, tongue poking out in intense focus. He's recording how many fish the vendor sold this morning. The vendor, chewing something that's probably older than you want to think about, looks on suspiciously. You hear grumbling, something about a missing carp, and suddenly you realize this sleepy-looking tablet isn't just a receipt. It's a weapon, a shield, a legal statement of truth in a world where memory is fog and disputes are daily. The clay tablet in the scribe's hand is small, but it carries weight, literally and figuratively, because if that fish seller tries to backpedal on yesterday's price, this tablet's coming out of the archives like a blunt-edged truth grenade. Historians still argue whether these early receipts were more about controlling the people or empowering them. But what's clear is that once Uruk started keeping records, the world never stopped. And yes, the receipts are boring, stupendously boring. Rows of symbols detailing quantities of barley, measurements of beer, even rations for temple staff. But they're also oddly satisfying, like those spreadsheet color-coding videos or watching someone restock a vending machine in slow motion. There's a rhythm to the numbers, a sleepy hum in the repetition. One tablet lists the delivery of baskets of dates to the temple of Inanna. Another logs the disbursement of 6 sheep to the temple kitchen. You wonder idly how many priests it takes to eat 6 sheep, and then decide not to dwell on it. Some tablets even note the names of individuals responsible for moving goods from one place to another, making them the world's first receipt signatories. No tip included, just eternal accountability. And here's the quirky bit. Sometimes receipts weren't even written. They were sealed, encased in clay envelopes called bulle, containing small tokens that represented specific commodities. The idea. If you broke open the bulla and the tokens didn't match what the outside inscription said, you'd know someone was trying to pull a fast one. Like opening a tamper-proof cookie jar and finding raisins instead of chocolate chips. It's laughably rudimentary. But at the time, it was revolutionary. Now, of course, this system wasn't foolproof. Clay breaks, water dissolves things. And scribe error was very much a thing, especially when a teenager was doing homework while half asleep. But still, for something carved into mud, these receipts lasted. In fact, archaeologists today have uncovered hundreds of thousands of them, which is kind of wild when you realize someone in 2 BCE thought, you know what? I'm going to record that I gave Nabu 4 goats and a small jar of fig wine. And now, 4,000 years later, you are lying in bed hearing about it. Let that sink in. Meanwhile, back in the streets of Uruk, a potter is yelling about someone shorting him on clay. A scribe is scribbling furiously. A priest is making very suspiciously specific requests for incense and honey. And somewhere deep in a storage room, a bored intern is stacking baked tablets in rough chronological order, dreaming of becoming a priest one day, or at least someone who doesn't have to count sheep in 110-degree heat. And yes, receipts are being born, slowly, smudged, bent at the corners, sometimes stepped on, but always cataloguing, always marking the moments of economic exchange that will outlive empires, kings, and possibly even the concept of fun. You stretch out under the slow-setting sun of Uruk, surrounded by the soft scratch of styluses, the gentle clink of baked clay, and the distant groan of a merchant rereading the small print. It's not exciting, it's not dramatic, but it's very, very real. And really, what could be sleepier than the dawn of financial accountability? You're still in Uruk, your sandals caked in dried mud, the scent of sheep persistent and clinging to your every breath. And just when you think things can't get any more mundane, you're invited, no, summoned, to witness an argument over goats. Not epic, world-ending goats, not magical goats, just regular, stubborn, bleating goats who've somehow managed to turn a quiet afternoon into a bureaucratic crisis. You follow the commotion to a sun-bleached courtyard where 2 traders are having what can only be described as a slow-motion shouting match. One insists he gave 4 goats for 5 sacks of barley. The other claims it was 3 goats and a half-sack discount for previous business. A clay tablet is waved in the air like a middle-aged man showing off his golf scorecard. And suddenly, you realize, this is why receipts were invented. You shuffle closer, mostly out of boredom. One of the men gestures toward the scribe sitting, just off to the side, looking supremely disinterested while rolling a fresh slab of clay. The scribe, bless his heart, has probably heard this exact argument 7 times already this week, but he sighs, smooths the clay, and begins to record, methodically, precisely, and at a pace that suggests he's not in any particular rush to save either man from public embarrassment. And here it is, the moment you see how livestock, especially goats, played a vital role in kickstarting administrative record-keeping. Goats were more than just walking lawnmowers. They were valuable, stubborn assets. Assets that moved, bleated, occasionally escaped, and more than once got mistaken for someone else's entirely. When you're trading goats for food, beer, or labor, and no one's writing it down, you're just begging for drama. Historians still argue whether the earliest receipts were driven more by temple economies or private trade, but they agree that tracking livestock became one of the first priorities in Mesopotamian accounting. Why? Because unlike bags of grain or jars of oil, goats don't stack well. They're loud, they wander, and sometimes they die inconveniently in the middle of a transaction. You can't just look someone in the eye and say, I gave you 3 goats last week, because they'll absolutely say, no you didn't, and then what? Back to square one. So instead, you get documentation. At first it's simple. Tokens made of clay that represent each goat, sealed in a round envelope with markings on the outside. You hand over the token bulla and the recipient breaks it, open when they need to verify what they were owed. Imagine the world's worst Christmas cracker. Inside, instead of a joke or tiny toy, you get a tiny clay bean representing 1 goat. Riveting. Riveting. Later, as this token system evolves, those marks on the outside of the bulla become more important than what's inside. Eventually, people just start writing the information directly on flat tablets, skipping the envelope altogether. Why carry two things when you can carry one really heavy thing instead? And then, oh yes, people start itemizing. Now, you're seeing receipts that say 3 goats, black, unblemished, received in exchange for sila of barley, transaction approved by Lugalam. That level of detail might sound excessive until you realize it's protecting people, especially when the goats involved are part of a temple's sacred herd. You don't want to accidentally give away one of Inanna's divine nannies. There's even fringe speculation among scholars that some of these goat transactions were accompanied by blessings or curses, subtle divine nudges baked into economic exchanges. It's not exactly proven, but one receipt ends with the phrase, "May Dumuzi keep these goats fertile." It's either a polite prayer or a very intense business review. And the scribes? They're the real powerhouses here. No one moves a goat without them. Their ledgers become law, and their ability to record accurately determines whether someone eats or starves, gets paid or punished. You notice now how the scribes have built a culture of quiet importance. They don't shout, they don't argue. They just record and let the tablets do the shouting for them later. You pause for a moment near a corral and watch a young boy trying and failing to herd 3 goats through a wooden gate. The goats scatter in 3 directions, bleating like toddlers denied dessert. The boy sighs, clearly aware that he's about to end up in someone's clay tablet, as the kid who lost the temple goats. Somewhere in the distance, a priest mutters a prayer, and you're pretty sure it's for patience rather than divine intervention. Meanwhile, deeper inside the temple walls, high-ranking officials sit at stone tables reviewing rows of receipts, each line a record of bartered livestock, carefully measured grain, or temple worker rations. There's something hypnotic about it. The same phrases appear again and again. Received, delivered, accounted for. It's less language, more lullaby. The repetition soothes you. The boredom, honestly, is kind of comforting, like white noise, but ancient and dusty. And here's your quirky historical tidbit for the evening. One receipt found near Nippur lists a transaction involving not just goats and grain, but also one lute string from a broken harp. Was it valuable, sentimental, an inside joke? Historians have no idea. But someone felt the need to document it alongside 10 goats and 3 clay jars of sour beer. So you trudge onward, the sun slipping lower behind the city walls, the sound of bleating slowly fading behind you. You can still hear a merchant grumbling about that goat that never came back, and you understand now why Mesopotamians turned to clay and stylus, not to capture poetry, not even to sing the praises of their gods, but to answer the most ancient, sleep-inducing question in economic history. Wait, how many goats did I give you again? You find yourself in a quieter part of the city now. The hum of trade, replaced by the muffled squish of your feet in the clay-packed alleyways. In the shade of a low wall, a young apprentice leans over a curious object, a round lump, smooth on the outside, with faint markings carved into the surface. He's trying not to drop it. You get closer. It's no ordinary clay ball. It's a bulla, and inside is the ancient equivalent of a receipt inside a safe inside a safe. Before receipts were tablets, before writing even looked like writing, the Mesopotamians were already trying to outsmart each other with little clay capsules that stored not words, but tokens. Tiny shapes, each one representing a specific good. One cone might be a sheep. A disc might mean a bushel of barley. You carry a handful of these things, and you're basically a walking spreadsheet, minus the scrolling. The apprentice hands you the bulla like it's something fragile, sacred, and in a way, it is. It's a locked record, sealed tight. Once it's closed, there's no peeking without breaking it open, no editing, no finessing the numbers. And if someone disputes what's been promised or delivered, the answer isn't found in memory or witness. It's right there, inside the ball. Historians still argue whether these bullae were ever meant to be opened or if they were more like symbolic contracts, tokens of trust and mutual understanding. Some suggest they were permanent, unopened, their contents accepted as agreed upon fact. Others believe they were opened upon delivery to verify that the physical tokens matched the transaction. Either way, They represent something astonishing. A pre-literate society's attempt at long-term accountability. You sit on a cool stone and turn the bulla over in your hands. There's a symbol scratched into the outer surface, a kind of proto-signature. Maybe it's the scribe's mark, maybe it's the merchant's. Maybe it's just someone doodling while their goat ran away again. Regardless, it marks the beginning of something inescapable, the age of formal record-keeping. Not storytelling, not mythology, but the logistical, inescapable drudgery of real life. And here's where it gets weird. These bully predate written language. That's right. People were creating physical representations of trade and debt before they had a way to write about them. Imagine inventing the filing cabinet before the alphabet. That's like building IKEA furniture without the instruction manual. Frustrating, baffling, and yet, somehow, it worked. One bulla discovered near the ancient city of Susa was found to contain 16 tokens, cylindrical, spherical, and conical, all of which were believed to track a delivery of agricultural goods. Beside it, a flat tablet bearing symbols that matched the tokens inside. This was the tipping point. Over time, the tokens would vanish, and the writing alone would remain. But for now, the Mesopotamians still needed their pocket-sized objects to keep it real. A scribe walks by, frowning at the sight of you fiddling with a bulla like it's a stress ball. He mutters something about symbolic authority and don't smudge the surface, which is a lot of intensity for someone tracking barley, but you nod, humbled. These weren't just rocks with markings. They were contracts, promises, sometimes even curses. Seriously, one partially broken bulla had traces of an inscription asking the gods to shatter the herd of the man who breaks this seal. Ancient fraud prevention at its pettiest. You wander into a small, low-ceilinged storage room next. Rows of clay balls line crude shelves. It's a bulla archive, something between a piggy bank collection and a cursed candy jar lineup. Each one represents a transaction, now frozen in time. Some are cracked open, their tokens lost or scattered. Others remain sealed, tight-lipped witnesses to deals long expired. And then there's the strange case of the false bulla. A handful of archaeological sites have uncovered bullae that appear to have no tokens inside, deliberately empty. Why? No one's sure. Perhaps they were ritual objects. Perhaps they were symbolic receipts, an evolved version where the act of sealing itself was the transaction. Or maybe, just maybe, some scribe got lazy and faked it. The Mesopotamian equivalent of printing a blank invoice and hoping no one asks questions. Now, the act of making a bulla wasn't quick or easy. First, you had to make the tokens, each one shaped carefully to represent specific goods, goats, jars, loaves. Then you had to enclose them in a soft clay envelope, seal it, and mark it with identifying symbols. Finally, you had to let it dry, or more often, bake it, because nothing says, "Please preserve this mundane transaction forever," like sticking it in an open fire. You lean back against the wall, blinking slowly as a scribe explains how each token had to be consistent in shape and size. Too big, and someone might claim it represents more than it does. Too small, and it might be dismissed as meaningless. Somewhere between monopoly piece and religious icon, these tokens tread a bizarre line between function and faith. And then you realize you're watching civilization become slightly less chaotic, slightly more predictable. The bulla is the beginning of order, not peace, not justice, not even fairness, just order. And order, as it turns out, is very, very boring, gloriously boring. The kind of boring that comes with predictable trade, recorded promises, and fewer goat-related brawls. You leave the storage room, passing a young apprentice who's just botched a token shape and is being gently scolded by his teacher. "That's not a goat," the elder says flatly. "That's a potato." The boy looks deflated. You give him a sympathetic nod. "We've all been there. We've all been there." The sun is setting again, golden light catching on the edges of shelves and bullae alike. You feel like you've been through a time machine designed by an accountant, but there's peace in it, a kind of ancient tranquility, no drama, no fanfare. Just small clay balls, each one whispering the same soft truth. We traded, we agreed, we remembered. The sun slips beneath the horizon as you step into the dim glow of an oil lamp, its flickering light casting long shadows across a low stone bench. Two scribes sit hunched over a shallow trough of water and clay, muttering softly, methodically. Their styluses, simple reeds cut to a wedge, tap against the surface of a fresh tablet with the soft rhythm of a heartbeat slowed by routine. You ease into a seat nearby, drawn in by the quiet music of bureaucracy. Tonight, you're witnessing something revolutionary in the most unspectacular way imaginable. Forget battles, forget inventions of fire or the wheel. What you're watching is the first proper cuneiform, writing as a deliberate, repeatable system. Language turned into shapes, communication turned into data. But here's the catch. The scribes aren't writing poetry. They're not etching epics. They're not even gossiping about whose ox trampled whose melon cart. No. They're logging rations. Exactly how much barley each temple worker gets, which family received oil last week, and which merchant still owes 4 baskets of dried figs. You know, the sexy stuff. You glance down at the tablet being shaped in front of you. It's still moist, its edges smoothed like a newly paved road. Then the stylus goes to work. A triangle, a wedge, a few quick strokes. What emerges isn't art, at least not in the way we usually mean it. It's a standardized system, clean, repetitive, entirely designed to be read by someone else in a dusty room 3 weeks later who would otherwise have no idea what a medium goat, mostly brown, looked like. And this moment is where it all changes. Because this isn't proto-writing, this isn't symbolism, this is cuneiform, the first true script, born from necessity and raised on grain. Historians still argue whether this transition happened all at once or slowly evolved from pictographic token shapes scratched onto surfaces. The dominant theory says the old pictographs became increasingly abstract, trimmed down to their essential strokes. And then, at some point, click, the pictograph of a fish was no longer a fish. It was a word, a sound, a concept. Not this specific. Goat. Just goat. That mental shift, that's the real revolution. You stop recording things, and you start recording language. You can almost hear the temple accountants sighing in delight. But don't get too excited. Early cuneiform is about as thrilling as a grocery list written in legalese. You lean over a scribe's shoulder and read the translation. Received. Silla of barley, 12th day of the harvest month. Overseer, Enlil Malik, to be stored in the southern granary. Not exactly bedtime reading, but hey, perfect for bedtime, listening. The scribes work in near silence, heads bent, their movements automatic. This is a new priesthood, not of gods, but of graphs. They're the original paper pushers, minus the paper. Their reed styluses clack gently, making indentations in patterns so specific, so standardized, that you begin to realize this is more than writing. It's code, not like computer code, of course. These guys wouldn't know a motherboard from a sandal strap. But still, each wedge carries a meaning locked in place by context, structure, repetition. And this script, these gentle, mind-numbing marks, is the foundation of economic memory. A permanent ledger in a world where memory is fallible and goat owners are suspicious. The tablets themselves are surprisingly uniform. Squarish, sometimes oval. No larger than a modern paperback, though less fun to read on a beach. Wet clay is the perfect notepad, malleable, cheap, and if you mess up, you just smooth it over. No erasers needed. Just press harder. Or, for more dramatic edits, toss the whole thing back into the vat and start over. It's the Mesopotamian Ctrl plus Z. And here's a delightfully quirky tidbit. Some scribes included doodles or accidental fingerprints on their tablets. One tablet discovered near Lagash has a small paw print on it, possibly a dog, maybe a cat, or perhaps the world's earliest intern. Another has a scribe's note in the corner. Too much barley? Written in a barely legible wedge. Was it sarcasm? A nervous joke? An actual mistake? Scholars can't agree. But it's comforting to know that even 5 years ago, someone was second-guessing their math. Over time, the script evolves. What starts as simple records of barley and livestock becomes more complex, recording names, jobs, places. One line might say, Utu, daughter of Lugal-Era, receives oil. And just like that, a real person stumbles out of the dust of history, holding a jar of sesame oil. You can picture her maybe, sweaty, tired, annoyed she has to wait behind, 2 other people arguing over chicken feed. You move deeper into the scribal quarters. On the walls, training tablets line wooden shelves, some barely legible. These are the rough drafts of students, their wedges too wide, their spacing uneven. They practice by copying the same transaction over and over again until it's muscle memory. 3 sheep for temple rations. Again. 3 sheep for temple rations. Again. It's the Mesopotamian version of I will not chew gum in class. You wonder about those students. What did they dream of? Did any of them want to write stories instead? Did they sneak in love poems between barley tallies? Or were they just kids whose parents thought scribal school was better than chasing goats? You'll never know. But the tablets remain, silent witnesses to youthful boredom, professional diligence, and the absolute terror of misrecording a tax report. By the time you step back into the courtyard, the night has settled. Crickets chirp in the reeds. Somewhere, nearby, a dog barks once, then gives up. And you understand now why clay tablets mattered. Not just as receipts, but as anchors, anchoring transactions in time, anchoring memory in matter, anchoring civilization in little rectangles of dried dirt. You glance back at one last tablet resting on a windowsill, half-baked in more ways than one. It reads simply, 7 silla of beer, delivered. No names, no date, just that. Someone got their beer, someone made sure it was recorded, and just like that, a moment in time was saved from being forgotten. You move along the winding corridor of the scribal complex, following the earthy scent of baked clay and inkless dreams. Past a stack of half-dried tablets and a scribe loudly, sighing over a crooked column of numbers, you find a low chamber lined with narrow benches and long, flat work tables. Welcome to Scribe School, where young Mesopotamians train to become the human printers of their age. It's early morning, and you arrive just as the day's lessons are beginning. A stern instructor, his tunic dusty from yesterday's barley audit, slams a reed stylus onto the table like a gavel. 5 apprentices flinch in unison. The lesson today: repetition, as always. Writing without understanding, yet. Just muscle, rhythm, and mud. 3 goats, 5 goats, 7 goats, the students chant quietly, pressing identical wedge shapes into their practice tablets. It's both mesmerizing and deeply dull, like watching someone alphabetize bricks. The instructor walks behind them, nodding at decent strokes, flicking a lazy ear when someone's wedge slips out of line. It's not harsh, just precise. Order must be kept. You sit cross-legged at the back, unnoticed. A student to your right is visibly struggling with the word for wool. His stylus jabs the tablet too hard, then skids to the side. He groans, softly. The instructor leans over. That's a sheep sneezing, not wool. The room snickers. But here's the thing. These kids aren't just learning to write, they're learning to administer. Scribe School isn't creative writing class, it's accountancy boot camp. Their future will involve tallying barley rations, copying legal contracts, logging temple inventories, and, if they're lucky, maybe documenting a royal decree once or twice. The Mesopotamian dream. Historians still argue whether all scribes were trained in the same way, or whether elite institutions reserved advanced curriculum, like law codes or divine hymns, for the few. There's evidence that different schools existed. Temple-run, palace-run, and even family-run scribal traditions. Some tablets hint at private tutoring, young nobles getting their wedge-pressing skills from elite tutors, while the commoners copied goat receipts by moonlight. But even with this stratification, The foundation remained the same. Start with numbers. Learn the symbols for quantities. Master the formatting. And above all, copy, copy, copy. You look around. You look around. Each student has 2 tablets. One pristine, the model to copy from, and one already smudged by sweaty fingers and beginner mistakes. The idea is simple. Mimic until you get it right. No questions, no embellishments, no interpretation. You are the hand of record, not the voice of opinion. And in a bizarre twist, this rigid discipline also created some of the earliest examples of homework. Several tablets have been found with phrases like, "I wrote this at home," scratched in the margins, proof that even 5 years ago, students were being sent home with their styluses and the haunting phrase, "Finish the barley inventory by sunrise." As you watch, a lanky boy named Dumuzi drops his tablet. It lands face down in the dust, smearing half his morning's work. He looks ready to cry. The instructor sighs, picks it up, and without a word, smooths the surface with his palm. "Again," he says. No drama, just endless practice, like learning piano scales but with more references to goat fat. It's worth noting, by the way, that scribes weren't just the nerds of Mesopotamia. They were powerful. In many cities, scribes held elite status. They could read, write, calculate, and access temple archives. They could draft contracts, advise priests, and even manage land deals. Becoming a scribe was a ticket out of the mud-brick suburbs and into the bureaucratic elite. In other words, learn to make a wedge, and maybe you get a courtyard of your own someday. Quirky side note, some scribes had personal signature symbols they'd add at the end of a tablet, like an ancient version of signing your name with a doodle. One popular mark was a tiny foot shape. Another was a fish. You try not to laugh. Imagine ending your serious agricultural inventory with a smiling trout. But it wasn't all grind. Eventually, as students progressed, they moved beyond counting sheep and toward the Adaba texts, a formal curriculum that included proverbs, model contracts, and legal scenarios. If a man rents an ox and the ox dies. These case studies helped scribes anticipate real-world situations. Think of it as the Mesopotamian version of bar prep, just with more livestock. One common proverb from these student texts reads, "A scribe who knows no accounting, what is he?" Which, translated loosely, means, if you can't do math, don't touch the stylus. Another reads, "A poor scribe is a scribe of the poor." Harsh, you stand and stretch, your legs tingling from the long sit. The class is ending. Students wipe down their tablets or toss the practice clay back into a shared bin, recycling BCE style. The instructor makes no grand speeches. He simply points toward tomorrow's lesson scratched on a side wall. Beer rations for workers. Another day, another wedge. As you exit, you pass a tiny alcove with shelves stacked high with student tablets. Most are barely legible, some cracked, some preserved. And among them, a gem, a tablet that simply reads, "I am tired." Just that. No grain count, no livestock tally. Just a raw, honest sigh pressed into clay by some long-gone teenager who had had enough of sheep math. You run your fingers over the ridges. It's the most human thing you've read all day. Tiredness pressed into mud. Thousands of years later, it still resonates. You're tired too, but not from toil, just from time travel. Scribal school is exhausting in its own uniquely beige way. Outside, the wind carries a trace of dust and distant incense. You spot a graduate scribe crossing the plaza, his stylus tucked proudly behind one ear. He nods toward you, serene in his mastery of the wedge. You nod back. His world is made of rectangles and repetition. And yet, it works. Everything here runs on clay, on numbers, on memory hardened in earth. And tomorrow they'll copy it all again. You wander out into the wide, sun-drenched plaza of the city, where scribes and merchants pass each other in lazy loops, sandals slapping the dust-packed ground. The air is thick with the scent of baked bread and drying fish, and there's a low hum of human activity, faint conversations, oxen snorting, the occasional loud haggling about lentils. This is the city's economic heart, a place of trade and transaction, and it runs on receipts. Not digital ones, of course, not printed slips with barcodes, no annoying email confirmations in your spam folder. These receipts are thick, palm-sized slabs of clay, cradled carefully in hand-woven baskets, or wrapped in reed mats like treasure. They look like they belong in a museum, and yet here, they're alive, functional, binding. You stroll past a merchant booth where two men argue over a shipment of sesame oil. One is furious, jabbing a finger at a small tablet. "It says 4 jars, he shouts, though it comes out as more of a dusty wheeze. The other shrugs and waves his own tablet in response. But this one says 3. You can't help but smile. The oldest fight in the world. Whose receipt is right? This is when it clicks for you. These aren't just records. These are contracts. Signed, sealed, and sun-dried. Each one a permanent, legally recognized artifact of exchange. And here's the juicy bit. They even had duplicates. One for the seller, one for the buyer. Occasionally, one for the temple. It's the 21st century world in a 3rd millennium BCE. Outfit. One quirky detail catches your eye. A clay envelope. Yes, a literal clay shell encasing a tablet inside. It's like wrapping your receipt in concrete. Why? To prevent tampering. A transaction would be recorded on a tablet, then sealed, in a clay envelope with the details written again on the outside. If someone accused the outer version of being forged, a judge could crack the envelope and read the original. It's ancient fraud prevention, and yes, it's as dramatic as it sounds. Imagine trying to sneakily edit a number when your receipt is entombed in stone. You'd have better luck lying to your grandma with your mouth full of cake. Historians still argue whether these clay envelopes, called bulli, were reserved for high-stakes transactions, like large land sales, tax agreements, or legal claims, or if they were more common than we think and just didn't survive in huge numbers. Either way, the intention is clear. People didn't trust each other, and Mesopotamians weren't about to lose a lawsuit over bad handwriting. As you keep walking, you come across a small stall operated by a clever-looking woman with a chipped tooth and an impeccably organized display of fish. She's dealing with a middle-aged man who seems unsure of how many baskets he's paid for. Without a word, she pulls out a tablet from under her mat. You lean over. The wedges read, 5 fish baskets, shekel silver, Enhedu stall, 3rd, day of the new moon. Signed with a stylized star at the corner. That signature? It's her mark. No ink needed. Just baked certainty. A few things jump out at you. First, the precision. Dates mattered. Names mattered. Quantities definitely mattered. You couldn't just scribble some bread and hope it held up in court. And second, there's standardization here. The units, shekels, minas, sila, are established, understood, and expected. It's the birth of bureaucracy as we know it. It's hard to overstate how modern it all feels. Not because it resembles computers or Wi-Fi, but because it reveals the logic that underlies our world. When people don't trust memory, they invent systems. When barter gets messy, they invent standards. And when disputes arise, they reach for the tablet. And it gets even better. You make your way into a quieter side alley, where older tablets rest on shelves in a small archive. You brush your fingers over a particularly ancient one, its edges worn like an old pebble. The inscription. It logs the exchange of 10 goats for land rights along a canal. It even lists witnesses. 2 names, with stylized headmarks to indicate identity. That's right, witnesses, notaries, if you will. And the role was taken seriously. There are even surviving tablets with lines like, witnessed by Belnadin, scribe of the temple of Inanna. Being present at a contract wasn't just ceremonial, it added legal weight. And if things went south, the witnesses could be summoned to clarify who promised what and how many goats were actually involved. You chuckle softly. Goats really are the currency of drama around here. But receipts weren't limited to purchases. Oh no. They expanded to labor agreements, rations, temple, dues and marriage arrangements. One tablet records a loan. Lugula borrows shekels of silver to repay in barley within 3 months or forfeit 1 ox. It's a payday loan, ancient style, but with an ox instead of your credit score. Another tablet, a bit more personal, outlines the duties of a bride, the property she brings, and what she's entitled to in case of divorce, all spelled out in cool, emotionless wedge shapes. Romance, Mesopotamian edition. The weirdest one you find, a record stating that a man had delivered a live lion to the temple. No context, no fee, just that, a lion, a lion. The mind wanders. By now, the day's light is beginning to soften, and the long shadows stretch between the vendor stalls. You stop at a drink stand and sip something vaguely sweet, possibly fermented, possibly just warm river water with attitude. Nearby, 2 young scribes discuss something animatedly. One's holding a fresh tablet, nodding and pointing. You edge closer, listening. They're arguing about a record where someone logged 19 sheep, but the stylus mark clearly reads 20. The implications? A whole sheep off. Someone's going to get blamed, and likely someone's going to get yelled at, loudly, possibly with a reed to the head. So you see it now, clearly. The humble receipt isn't humble at all. It's the cornerstone of accountability in a world that had no erasers. In Mesopotamia, if it's not on a tablet, it didn't happen. And if it is, well, may the gods help you if it's wrong. You walk on, watching the day end. A merchant folds up his stall. A scribe carries a clay envelope to the temple archive. And somewhere, a lion stalks a courtyard, wondering how it became part of the administrative record. You wake early, the low thump of drums echoing softly across the baked rooftops. The sun hasn't yet cleared the temple ziggurat, but the city is already stirring. Merchants unlocking baskets, priests mumbling incantations into the dust, and somewhere nearby, a scribe mumbling curses at a crooked column of barley figures. You rub your eyes, stretch your back, and head toward the largest structure in town, the temple. Not because you're feeling spiritual, but because you've got receipts to follow. See, this is where things get interesting. You're about to discover that in ancient Mesopotamia, temples weren't just places for prayer. They were economic engines, as powerful as any corporation. You step through the temple gate and into a courtyard, alive with motion. Carts creak under bags of grain. Oxen shuffle. A line of people, some with livestock, others with baskets of dates or dried reeds, wait patiently to present their offerings. A man ahead of you sneezes and nearly drops a jar of beer. Classic. And right there, to one side, under a long portico, the scribes, their reed pens poised, clay tablets in neat rows. They're here to record every single item that comes in or goes out. You ease closer. A young woman approaches with a bundle of flax. She murmurs her name, the quantity, and the purpose of the delivery. A scribe nods, presses his stylus into the soft clay, and confirms the transaction. 2 bundles flax, temple, weaving house, delivery by Iltani, 5th day, month of the harvest. And just like that, the flax exists in official space. It has entered the temple's books. The gods approve. What's wild is that this wasn't just religious ceremony, it was logistical necessity. Temples owned land. Temples employed workers. Temples managed herds, orchards, bakeries and breweries. They weren't just sacred spaces, they were factories with altars. Historians still argue whether temples functioned more like state-run institutions or autonomous corporations. Some evidence suggests they were effectively independent economies, hoarding wealth and doling out rations like divine payroll departments. Others argue that palace and temple economies were deeply entangled, run by a shared elite with overlapping power bases. Either way, the paper, or rather the clay trail, doesn't lie. The temples had the receipts. You peek at a tablet being dried in the sun nearby. It lists wool, minas, beer, jars, copper tools, 2. The recipient? temple carpenter's house, which means even the maintenance crew had a supply chain, and it had to be documented. But here's the kicker. The receipts didn't just record goods, they also recorded labor. People didn't always get paid in coins, they got paid in rations. You work 5 days in the temple's granary. You receive barley, oil, maybe a little beer, and that too goes on a tablet. It's like getting a paycheck, except you eat it. One particularly well-preserved tablet from the city of records barley payments made to workers over the course of several days. It's a masterpiece of boredom, detailing who received how much and when. But in that monotony is magic. It tells you who mattered, what was valuable, and how labor flowed through society. A quirky little twist. Some scribes like to write their tablets in verse, not rhyming exactly, but rhythmic enough to aid memorization. Imagine someone chanting, "Barley for the potter, barley for the brewer, barley for the man who repaired the well." Like a payroll chant you sing to yourself to keep from losing your mind. And every tablet like this, stored in the temple archives, vast libraries of dried mud, sorted by purpose and date, often sealed in baskets or clay jars. You pass one such storage room now, the walls lined with rows of shelved receipts. You stop and run your hand across the edge of a cracked tablet. It's hot to the touch, warmed by the morning sun, and surprisingly smooth. You read the inscription slowly. Issued by the chief scribe of Inanna's temple. 10 workers, dug canal, paid in fish and millet. The tablet is over 4 years old, and yet it feels like last week's spreadsheet. But the most fascinating detail? Many of these temple receipts include emblems of divine approval, tiny drawings or seals bearing the image of a god or goddess. Like saying, this transaction is not just legit, it's sacred. Imagine your tax return stamped with a divine emoji, and those seals. They're not pressed with fingers. They're made with cylinder seals, tiny carved rollers that create an image when pressed across. Wet clay. You watch now as a scribe takes one from around his neck and rolls it across a new tablet. The result is a miniature masterpiece. 2 lions flanking a starburst. It takes your breath away a little. Cylinder seals were both personal signatures and security devices. If you saw a familiar seal, you knew the document was authentic. If it was missing or broken, you'd suspect fraud. Think of them as ancient pin codes, except prettier and much easier to lose. You walk a little farther and pass a priest overseeing the barley storehouse. He's watching as labourers unload heavy sacks into a shaded chamber. One worker grumbles. Another drops a sack and gets scolded. A scribe notes it all, pressing sharp marks with eerie calm. You hear him mutter, "Sack torn. Contents weighed. Short by 4 minas. Warning issued." Justice by stylus. Cold, methodical, and eternal. There's something oddly comforting in all this. For all the dust and sweat and donkey smells, the system works, goods move, labour is logged. The gods get their offerings, the people get their beer. And the scribes, well, they get a sore wrist and a future place in some museum's climate-controlled display case. You sit on a low bench at the edge of the courtyard. Above, the ziggurat rises like a man-made mountain, its top lost in haze. The air smells of hot clay and old incense. Somewhere, a choir sings a wordless hymn. But down here, it's all records, totals, deliveries, the machinery of a city disguised as devotion. A boy walks past with a small, fresh tablet clutched to his chest like it's precious. You peek over. 1 line, carefully written. 1 piglet, gifted to Enlil. You smile. That little clay square may survive longer than your smartphone ever will. The sun sits high now, casting molten light across the mud brick skyline. You make your way along the edge of the canal, past tethered donkeys and a boy elbow deep in date syrup, until the scent of wet reeds and damp soil gives way to the crisp smell of fired clay. You're approaching the school, though school might be a generous term. What you find is more like an outdoor workshop, shaded by woven palm fronds and full of boys hunched over flat clay tablets. The only thing louder than the scratch of styluses is the groaning. You've stumbled into a scribe academy, the original boot camp for receipt makers. And make no mistake, this was no easy gig. Becoming a scribe in ancient Mesopotamia wasn't like signing up for art class. It was a grueling, years-long process reserved for the sons of elites. You had to memorize hundreds of cuneiform signs, learn arithmetic, and, eventually, master the art of economic documentation. You sit quietly on a low stool, watching one poor student wince as an instructor leans over and slaps his wrist with a reed for writing the word for sheep backwards. Rough crowd. Before scribes could record actual transactions, they had to copy old ones, word for word. Repetition was everything. You glance over the shoulder of a student and see that he's replicating a tablet from years earlier. Something about oil rations for a temple cook. Exciting stuff. You can't help but smile. It's the ancient version of writing "I will not talk in class" times, except it's "I will not miscalculate barley by 1/60th." The curriculum even had a name, Aduba or tablet house. Sounds kind of charming until you realize it was part school, part labor camp, part accounting nightmare. The instructors? Known for their strictness and dry sarcasm. One preserved student tablet includes a complaint scrawled in shaky cuneiform. "My teacher hits me and says I must write faster." Somewhere, across time, every overworked intern nods in solidarity. Historians still argue whether these scribal schools were part of the temple system, independent institutions, or state-sponsored bureaucratic pipelines. Evidence varies by city. In some places, temple priests ran the schools directly. In others, private scribes trained apprentices in courtyard classrooms, just like this one. And the curriculum? Oh, it was vast. Students didn't just learn how to record that someone bought 3 goats. They had to know how to express fractions, equations, measurements, and even legal clauses. You see one boy now, scribbling the equivalent of, "If merchant A delivers wheat late, merchant B may reduce payment by 1/2 shekel," a primitive penalty clause, and a real finger twister to write in clay. You lean against a pillar and glance at the tablets laid out on a bench. One has practice columns of numbers in sexagesimal. That's base 60 math. Not 10, not 12, 60. Why? Because it divides neatly into many fractions, which was helpful for measuring grain, time, and especially for calculating taxes. Try doing long division in your head with no calculator, using a number system designed to turn your brain into soup. That's the daily grind for these kids. A few tablets even contain math word problems. You read one. If 5 men harvest a field in 10 days, how many days would it take 10 men? You blink. That's an algebra question, thousands of years ago, on a hunk of clay. The math hasn't changed, just the paper. A quirky twist. Some students snuck jokes or rude doodles into the margins of their work. One clay fragment has a cartoonishly large-nosed figure carved into the corner with the caption, "The barley inspector after 5 beers." Scribal humor, dry as a desert fig. And once students became proficient, they graduated into official roles, recording land transfers, measuring crop yields, even documenting sacrifices. You see one senior student now helping an elder scribe draft a real receipt for timber delivery. The old man nods approvingly, scratches his beard, and presses his seal onto the clay. It's a proud moment, the ancient equivalent of being handed the office keycard. You can't help but reflect. Every receipt you saw earlier, every contract, every tax tablet was first dreamed up in a place like this, by someone sweating through rote drills, scribbling signs for barley, goat, and penalty, clause, while dodging wax from a reed stick. And this wasn't just about paperwork. It was about power. Being a scribe meant you could read and write in a world where most couldn't. You became the voice of law, trade, memory, and ritual. You held the key to the administrative machine. Without scribes, the entire Mesopotamian system, temples, taxes, trades, kingships, would crumble into chaos. One mainstream fact that illustrates this: the famous Sumerian king list, a dynastic record stretching back into myth, was written by scribes to establish royal legitimacy. Basically, propaganda in wedge form, and only a trained few could decode it. Now, back to our sleepy little academy. You wander around to the far end of the courtyard, where a shelf holds discarded or broken tablets. Some were errors, others are practice sheets. You pick one up carefully. It reads, Lushuba received 1 ox, temple herd. There's a second line, crossed out violently. An early mistake perhaps. Even in clay, the delete key was alive and well, just much louder. As the day deepens and the school quiets, you see the students begin to yawn, their clay-covered fingers stiff and sore. One boy leans back, eyes half shut, tablet abandoned. The instructor lets him rest. Maybe he's dreaming of scribal glory, or maybe he's just trying to remember the difference between 3 sheep and 30 shekels. The scribal tradition here laid the foundation not just for accounting, but for literature, science, law, and everything in between. All thanks to these young minds and their stubborn little clay pads. You leave the school behind with a strange admiration for their patience and a strong sense of relief that you don't have to memorize cuneiform signs before lunch. You walk on through the city's dusty lanes, wondering if somewhere in your modern digital world, a weary intern is transcribing data into a spreadsheet, not knowing they're echoing the sighs of ancient students under the Mesopotamian sun. You wander now toward the market, your feet finding rhythm on the sun-baked street, the smell of fried onion and crushed coriander wafting from alley kitchens. The air is busier here, louder. Vendors holler over clay pots, bargaining over onions, fish, and sandals made from woven reeds. But you're not here for the shopping. You're here to witness the other half of the receipt story, the chaos outside the temple walls, because not everything in Mesopotamia flowed through temples. While temples dominated large-scale economic activity, the open-air marketplace was where everyday bartering thrived and where things got a lot messier. You duck beneath a canopy strung with date leaves and step into the thrumming center of trade. A woman waves dried figs under a man's nose. A potter argues with a customer over a cracked lip on a cooking jar. A boy counts fish bones like coins. And in the corner, a man's voice rises. That goat was not as advertised. Receipts out here, rare, but not non-existent, and definitely creative. See, while temples use standardized cuneiform receipts, everyday traders sometimes relied on oral contracts, personal seals, or quick and dirty tablets scratched on the fly. One vendor might hand over a token, a carved piece of clay or a broken potsherd marked with their personal symbol, as proof of a deal. You think of it like the world's most fragile store credit. And here's the kicker. Sometimes these market tokens were so informal they didn't survive the test of time unless they happened to be baked by accident, say, in a house fire. That's right. We know about some receipts today only because someone's kitchen burned down 4 years ago. You approach a butcher stall. He's hacking at a goat leg with a flint blade, talking quickly to a customer. There's a small clay tablet nearby, hastily impressed with 2 sets of marks. One for quantity, one for delivery. He notices you looking and shrugs, just in case he says I gave him the wrong cut. You nod. Buyer beware, even in BCE. Historians still argue whether most market exchanges were tracked this way, or if these clay contracts were rare exceptions used only in disputes. The surviving evidence is spotty. Burned shards here, sealed jars there. But the consensus? Where there was trade, there was some kind of receipt, even if it was as informal as a thumbprint in wet clay. What's especially interesting is the overlap between legal enforcement and economic tracking. In temple or court contracts, deals were often witnessed, sometimes by 3, 4, even 6 people, who'd all press their seals onto the tablet, like a sleepy jury. Here in the market, people sometimes called over bystanders to watch a transaction and say, "Yeah, I saw her give him that sheep." You pass 2 women arguing over a jar of oil. One accuses the other of watering it down. "Smell it," she hisses. "That's fish oil, not sesame." The vendor reaches for a pouch and pulls out a tablet with a seal on it. You can't read it from where you stand, but the gesture quiets the argument. Apparently, that's the receipt. The gods and clay have spoken. And that's the thing. Seals were the great equalizers. They let even those who couldn't read or write participate in Mesopotamia's growing paperwork jungle. You didn't need to know how to draw barley in cuneiform. You just had to roll your cylinder seal across the tablet and hope the scribe didn't mess up the numbers. You watch a young man do just that, pressing a tiny carved stone into a soft clay square after buying a batch of dried fish. The seal image, a lion fighting a bull. Dramatic, but memorable. He tucks the receipt into a cloth pouch and disappears into the crowd, lunch trailing behind him in a dripping basket. A quirky tidbit. Some seals were made of semi-precious stones and carved with astrological symbols or protective inscriptions. Not only did they validate a transaction, they were also thought to keep away bad luck or lying partners, like a lucky rabbit's foot meets notary stamp. And yes, sometimes disputes still happened. You move closer to a low bench where a man is laying out broken shards of tablet. He's sweating. Across from him, a city official, clearly a judge, is comparing the shard's impressions with a matching record. It seems someone tried to alter a delivery record, maybe to shortchange a supplier. The fragments don't line up. Busted. In cases like this, tablets often had duplicate copies. A temple, for example, might keep one sealed copy in their archives and give the other to the delivery person. If there was a dispute, crack both open, compare the records. Ancient version of check the backup drive. You step away from the judge and into the quieter corner of the market, where two elders are sipping barley beer from ceramic straws and trading stories. One says he once lost a herd of goats because his receipt got smeared in the rain. The other laughs. That's why you carry two. One for you, one for your idiot nephew. You wonder how many fortunes turned on a single tablet. One misplaced seal. One cracked piece of clay in a city full of donkeys and bad handwriting. And yet, for all its flaws, this system of informal and formal receipts allowed something powerful: scalable trade. You didn't have to know your customer personally. You just needed a seal, a record, and, if things went sideways, a witness or two. It was bureaucracy in baby steps, and it worked well enough to feed cities, build ziggurats, and keep peace for at least the length of a harvest season. You reach the edge of the market, where a man is baking small clay tablets over a fire, letting them harden into permanent records. He looks up and offers you one. Blank, smooth, a fresh slate. You smile and imagine what you'd write on it. You, sleepy listener, have just witnessed an entire civilization inventing paperwork, one goat and one stylus at a time. The city hum fades behind you as you follow a quiet path toward the edge of the river, where reeds sigh in the afternoon breeze, and the sky takes on that muted bronze tone only Mesopotamian sunsets can pull off. It's the perfect place to take a breath, or at least that's what you think, until you stumble onto the real reason you're here: the storerooms. Ah yes, because where there are receipts, there must be inventory. You round a low corner, wall, and find them. Massive mud brick buildings flanking the canals, their insides cooler and darker than the blazing world outside. The scent of dust, old grain, and clay hits you all at once, a dry perfume of ancient logistics. These are state-run storehouses, and they are the reason Mesopotamian receipts exist in the first place. Forget romantic notions of trade and scribes. This is the beating, sweating heart of the paperwork machine. Shelves groan under baskets of dates, sacks of barley, bricks of salt, copper tools, and bundles of wool. You barely squeeze past a man, hauling what looks like a tax collection crate labeled with cuneiform signs pressed into a hanging clay tag. Here's the big secret. The receipt wasn't just a convenience. It was a weapon against forgetfulness, against mismanagement, against that one guy who swore he totally brought the fish oil last month. The mainstream historical fact is this: centralized warehouses like these were used by temples and palace administrators to collect and redistribute goods. Workers were paid in rations, bread, beer, oil. And those rations had to be counted, tracked, recorded. That's where the receipts came in. Not just proof of ownership, but proof that a system was functioning. You crouch near a low shelf and spot dozens of tablets stacked in rows, each with a date, a commodity sign, and often a seal impression. Some are marked with what look like strange hashtags, tallies for quantities. Others have tidy lines dividing delivery dates from inventory amounts. There's even a tablet with a hand-drawn sketch of a goat beside the entry. You smile. Some early scribe clearly wasn't taking chances. Then it hits you. This isn't just a warehouse. It's a memory palace. Not the kind full of poetry and philosophy, but one made of grain, tools, and dried onions. A ledger written in dirt and sweat. You watch a scribe work, perched on an overturned basket, copying numbers onto a new tablet. He reads aloud as he writes, his voice low and deliberate. 4 shekels of copper from Hamu, sealed by Luningir, stored in bin 3. Then he presses a seal into the edge and moves on to the next. At this point, you're probably wondering, how did they keep it all straight? Honestly, so are historians. There's still debate over whether goods were stored by type, by delivery date, or by owner. Some storerooms show careful categorization. Others, absolute chaos. No one agrees. And to be fair, organizing 2 tons of onions with 0 spreadsheets sounds like a nightmare. You trail a worker down a long corridor lined with sealed jars. Each one has a clay tag tied to its neck with string, an early form of labeling. Some are simple. Barley. Others are a bit more dramatic. Temple Reserve. Do not open. You can't help but imagine a scribe somewhere fuming. How many times do I have to stamp this thing? A quirky tidbit, some of the oldest. Receipts we've found were actually embedded in walls or floors, literally sealed inside buildings as proof of transactions related to construction or storage. One tablet was discovered beneath the threshold of a temple room, like a bureaucratic time capsule. Paid in full. Bricks for the god Enlil. Imagine stepping over that every day on your way to morning prayers. And yes, fraud was a thing. Not everyone in Mesopotamia was honest. Some receipts seem to have been reused, scraped down, and restamped. Others contain corrections or added lines in a different handwriting. Suspicious at best, evidence of disputes at worst. One tablet reads, corrected by the supervisor. You just know that was an awkward meeting. You reach the far end of the warehouse, where broken jars and worn-out baskets are stacked beside a pit filled with failed or voided tablets. These didn't make the cut. Maybe they were miswritten, or the goods went bad, or the transaction fell through. Even 4 years ago, paperwork piled up in all the wrong places. Still, for all its flaws, the system worked. The receipts acted like economic anchors, a record of who owed what, who received what, and where things were supposed to be. And with writing came accountability. No more relying on memory. No more, I thought you said 3 sheep, not 30. You pause by a window slit, watching a line of workers carry in sacks of barley. Each one places their burden in a designated bin. A scribe checks it off on a tablet. Another rolls his seal to lock it in. The lead worker nods, no words exchanged. Just trust in the wedge marks, the clay, the styluses, the inventory tags. They all form part of an enormous social contract. These weren't just warehouses. They were the embodiment of Mesopotamian control over time and space. You don't just have food, you know how much food. You don't just give tools, you document who gave them and when. Every movement of goods is part of the larger orchestration. The modern analogy, think of a giant Amazon fulfillment center, only without forklifts, computers, or air conditioning. Just humans, math, and mud. And still, somehow, it all ticked forward. As you step back outside into the dry heat, the wind kicks up a swirl of dust and straw at your feet. You look down and imagine how many receipts might still lie beneath the soil, undiscovered, unread, unbroken. Tiny pieces of a vanished bureaucracy waiting to tell their story one day. And maybe, just maybe, one of them says something like, returned. One cracked jug, leaking. Because no matter how ancient the system, someone, somewhere, was always trying to get their deposit back. You stretch your arms and rub a bit of clay dust from your palm. The storerooms may be behind you, but the receipts aren't done with you yet. Not even close. Because now, we're diving into the side of this story that gets juicy, petty, and weirdly specific. Disputes. That's right. All these tablets, seals, and scribbles weren't just for keeping count. They were weapons in the ancient courtroom. You trudge toward the city center again, where scribes double as lawyers, judges arbitrate over lost donkeys, and cuneiform becomes the Mesopotamian equivalent of I'm calling corporate. You enter a small open-air court shaded by wooden beams and woven mats. No wigs or gavels here. Just a raised platform, a few scroll-holding officials, and a couple of very nervous-looking merchants holding damp clay receipts like they're golden tickets. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Receipts played a major role in legal disputes. Whether it was a disagreement over rent, a delivery that never showed, or a worker claiming they were shorted their beer rations, people brought their tablets to court. If it was stamped and signed, it was evidence. You sit near a vendor who's furiously whispering to a scribe. Something about a shipment of reeds that got washed away in the last flood. I told him. I said, "Look, it's right here." He slams a receipt down. The scribe squints. You glance over his shoulder. Sure enough, it reads, 30 bundles of river reeds, delivered by Enlil Mubi, confirmed. But no signature, no seal. Uh-oh. Because here's where things got tricky. Legitimacy. A receipt without a seal or proper witness might not be valid. It might have been forged or just sloppy. And if you think ancient Mesopotamians weren't faking receipts, let me assure you, they absolutely were. One tablet from the city of Nippur is marked suspect in a different hand. Modern archaeologists still argue whether it was forged or just weirdly rushed. And oh, the stories that came from these courtrooms. You eavesdrop on one now. A grain merchant is being accused of delivering half-rotten wheat to the temple. He's red in the face, holding a tablet with the day and amount etched into it. His seal clear as day. But the priest insists, "This is not the wheat I asked for. I asked for long-grain wheat." The merchant yells, "There was a shortage." The priest yells back, "Then you should have said something." It's like Judge Judy, but in Akkadian. A quirky tidbit. Some receipts came with attached warnings, little notes or symbols that basically meant, "Don't mess with this." Kind of like writing tamper-proof on a label. One receipt tablet included a curse. "He who alters this document shall have his house destroyed." You can't help but imagine a scribe furiously carving that into clay with passive-aggressive flair. You lean against a mud brick wall as a judge steps forward. He holds up a tablet. Both parties quiet. The seal on the back is smudged. Not broken, but not crisp either. A hush falls. The judge speaks softly. The seal is unclear. We summon the witness. And yes, that's another twist in the system. Receipts weren't just physical proof. They often named witnesses who could back up the deal. You glance toward a shady corner of the courtyard where a man is being fetched. He's got barley in his beard and the haunted expression of someone who really wishes he'd stayed home today. Historians still argue whether these courts were truly impartial or more like extensions of temple authority. Some tablets suggest scribes and judges were biased, or that certain temples had their own legal staff. Others point to court records that favored commoners over elites. The reality, as usual, is complicated and probably depended on who you knew and how clean your clay was. Another dispute is unfolding nearby. A woman stands tall, arms crossed, holding a thick receipt tablet like a weapon. She's accusing a wool supplier of shorting her fabric allotment. The supplier sputters, "I gave you 4 rolls!" She flips the tablet over. It says 5. The judge motions for both parties to hand over their seals. They match. The receipt is legit. Case closed. The supplier groans. The woman smirks. Somewhere, a scribe discreetly jots down another victory for paperwork. You find a shady bench. near the court's edge and take it all in. Here, the receipt becomes more than proof. It's authority. A clay rectangle that speaks louder than memory or excuses. A thing you can slam on a table when someone says, "That's not what we agreed to." And while most of these disputes were local, barley, fish, sheep, some had bigger stakes. Land claims, inheritance rights, tax evasion. One famous case from involved a woman using her deceased husband's receipts to reclaim land from his cousin. The judge ruled in her favor after comparing the date of the tablet to the delivery of temple goods. Boom. Instant history. You chuckle softly. Ancient receipts being used to win property battles. That's more relatable than you expected. A scribe walks past you now, carrying a clay envelope. Yes, an actual clay envelope, sealed shut with twine and stamped across the seam. These were often used for more formal receipts or contracts. If the seal was broken, you'd know someone tampered with it. You resist the urge to ask if it's marked urgent. You glance up and notice a small shelf built into the courtroom. Wall. Inside it are rows of baked tablets, archived disputes, past judgments, receipts long since paid, a bureaucratic time capsule, a reminder that even here, even now, paperwork was king. And it makes you wonder, how many relationships rose and fell on the strength of a clay square? How many friendships ended over mismatched seals and barley? Counts. Probably more than you'd think. You take one last look at the courtyard before moving on, the low hum of bickering fading behind you. The sun has started to dip behind the western towers, casting long shadows across the street. In the world of ancient Mesopotamia, trust was fragile. Memory was unreliable. People lied. People forgot. But receipts didn't blink. And that, sleepy traveler, is why these dusty little tablets still whisper their stories for millennia. Later, because someone, somewhere, refused to be shorted a sheep, the streets wind into tighter alleys now, each one a tangle of soot-dark bricks, sun-bleached shutters, and the occasional goat blocking your path with the entitlement of a seasoned tax auditor. You're heading toward a place most travelers skip, the scribe's quarter. It's quieter here, but don't let that fool you. Behind every closed door is a mind humming with numbers, symbols, and the quiet fury of a clay tablet smudged 10 minutes before deadline. Because tonight, we're diving into the real brains behind the receipt revolution, the scribes. You turn a corner and step into a small courtyard where rows of boys sit cross-legged, bent over smooth clay boards. They're not sketching doodles or poems. No, they're learning how to write numbers, tally commodities, and copy long, droning transaction records under the withering gaze of a teacher whose patience ran out 3 reigns ago. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Scribes were the bureaucratic elite of Mesopotamia. They were trained in tablet schools known as adubus from a young age, usually the sons of other scribes, priests, or officials. To graduate, they had to master hundreds of cuneiform signs, memorize administrative vocabulary, and survive endless hours of copying phrases like "one ox, delivered, no defects." You watch one poor kid scratch out a barley tally, only for the teacher to snatch it away, mutter, "Ugh, crooked wedges," and toss it back. The boy sighs and starts again. You've never seen such a poetic display of bureaucratic despair. These schools weren't just academic boot camps, they were social factories. To be a scribe was to gain access to power, to the temple system, to the gears that made society turn. Some scribes stayed in dusty inventory rooms. Others became royal advisors. A few even traveled, tablet in tow, acting as mobile receipt keepers during long trade journeys. But of course, the training wasn't just about writing. It was about calculation. You slip into a dim room where older students cluster around a slate covered in numeric signs. The Mesopotamian number system. Oh, it's base 60. That's right. Sexagesimal. Try doing fractions in that while sweating into your only linen robe. A quirky tidbit for you. Scribes often had nicknames, and many were sarcastic or mocking. One school tablet refers to a student as lazy wrist, while another warns, "Do, not let Dustface borrow your stylus again. If you've ever suffered through group projects, you get the vibe. You walk further into the district and spot a narrow shop stacked with tablets like some kind of prehistoric office supply store. Inside, a young man is furiously engraving a clay envelope. You lean in. Delivery. 4 geese, 2 sealed jars of beer, from Shulgibani to the temple steward. Do not tamper. He glances up. Need something copied? You shake your head. He shrugs and gets back to it. This is how it worked. If you needed proof of delivery, you didn't just say it aloud. You found a scribe. You dictated your goods. You paid a small fee, maybe a handful of dates or a swig of beer, and boom, instant evidence, baked and sealed. Scribes were everywhere. Public offices, temple halls, private homes. They were the middlemen of trust. And yes, historians still argue whether scribes were independent contractors or employees of the temple system. Some records show them moving between cities, suggesting a bit of freelance flair. Others list them on temple payrolls, receiving regular rations like any bureaucrat. The line, as always, is blurry. You pause beside a low bench where 2 scribes are arguing. One insists that barley delivered on the 7th day was actually short by 3 shekels weight. The other waves a tablet. No, you forgot the bonus. Jar of sesame oil. They glare, grumble, then pull out a 3rd tablet to cross-reference. Honestly, it's kind of beautiful. Because these weren't just data nerds. These were the keepers of reality. If it wasn't on the tablet, it didn't happen. A broken contract? A lost goat? A missing shipment of bricks? The scribe was your last best hope of clarity. Best hope of clarity. You run your fingers along a drying rack filled with fresh tablets, each one a snapshot of daily life. Received. 1 slave. For temple use. Issued. 2 linen robes to royal messengers. Rations. Reduced due to late arrival. Some are tiny and fit in the palm. Others are the size of a laptop and weigh just as much. And here's the kicker. Some receipts were actually jewels. 2 tablets, 1 for each party, sealed with matching impressions, like ancient carbon copies. Lose yours, and well, good luck in court. Out in the street again, the sun dips low and turns the dust golden. A boy runs past, dropping a wet tablet in the dirt. He groans, scoops it up, and heads straight for the kiln. Because yes, receipts weren't finished until they were fired. A raw tablet could be erased, reshaped, altered. But a baked one? That was forever. You pass a small shrine at the edge of the district. Inside, offerings of tiny styluses, burnt, incense, and, yep, miniature tablets. Scribes even had their own patron gods. Chief among them, Nisaba, goddess of writing and accounts. Her temples were filled with records, schools, and, according to one poem, a lot of sighing. You can't help but wonder, were there favourite styluses, pet peeves about wedge angles, secret jokes hidden in the margins? Almost certainly yes. One student tablet literally reads, "This tablet is too long, my hand hurts." Solidarity across centuries. Before you leave, a scribe stops you. He presses a smooth piece of clay into your hand. "Your receipt," he says with a wink. You look down. It says, "1 visit, fully observed, sleep debt, forgiven." You grin, because if there's one thing the scribes of ancient Mesopotamia knew, it was this. No matter how complex the world becomes, someone has to write it down. And just maybe, someone has to read it in a quiet voice to help people fall asleep 4,000 years later. You wander farther now, down a causeway lined with tall reed fences and clay water jars sweating in the late afternoon heat. Your sandals crunch against gravel, and from somewhere nearby comes the muffled sound of livestock. Maybe a goat who's just learned he's tomorrow's tax payment. Because tonight, your journey drifts into a side of receipts that's a little less paperwork, and a lot more tribute and taxes. Yep, we're talking about the ancient Mesopotamian taxman, the one who shows up not with a calculator, but with a ledger of grain and a scribe trailing behind him, stylus ready. You pass a group of temple workers unloading sacks from a cart. One mutters, Better be recorded properly this time. I'm not taking another barley deduction. Relatable, right? Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mesopotamian rulers relied heavily on in-kind taxation, which means people paid not in coins or cash, but in goods. Think livestock, fish, bricks, dates, oil, and yes, the ever-glorious barley. Receipts were used to prove that those taxes had been paid, or to accuse someone if they hadn't. So let's say your household owed the temple litres of sesame oil this year. You'd drag your jars to the tax depot, hand them over, and a scribe would issue you a clay receipt. Delivered, litres oil, from Lugal-Tur, year of Hammurabi, unblemished. Without that receipt, you might have to pay twice. It's not just temple taxes either. City-states ran like bureaucratic hives with everything documented and monitored. There were quota systems. Bakers had to produce a certain number of loaves, weavers had cloth output tracked, and boatmen had to transport a minimum number of goods. All of it came with receipts. A missing one could be catastrophic. You pass a weary-looking man grumbling as he hauls a goat down the road, muttering, "That priest better give me a tablet this time." He's not being dramatic. Without that receipt, the goat could vanish into the temple accounts and poof. As far as the record shows, you never paid your tax. Now you owe another goat. You don't want to owe another goat. A fringy but delightful tidbit. Some receipts list not just the goods delivered, but the condition of the taxpayer. One rare tablet reads, "One old sheep, limping slightly, offered in place of standard tribute, accepted by temple." Whether the scribe included that as a polite disclaimer or a bit of shade, we'll never know. Now, as you approach a cluster of low mud brick buildings near the canal, you hear arguments, loud ones. A tax collector is being confronted by a group of farmers. Their complaint? The collector said he wrote down our payment, but no tablet, and now they want double. You watch from a safe distance as a scribe mediates. One man finally pulls a crumbling receipt from his satchel, barely legible, but stamped. The scribe squints, nods, and waves them through. The others? No tablets. They're out of luck. The moral of the story? Always get a receipt. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian taxation was truly standardized or more of a patchwork depending on which temple or city you lived under. Some kings, like Urukagina of Lagash, tried to reform the system, making it fairer and less corrupt. Others, like some of Hammurabi's successors, were basically out here squeezing every jar of honey they could find. A merchant strolls past you now, his receipt tablet dangling from a cord around his neck like a clay dog tag. It's sun-baked, sealed, and probably smells faintly of sheep. That's dedication. But hey, if he gets stopped by a patrol asking for proof of payment, he's covered. You, not so much. Another cart rolls by, this one full of baked bricks. On the side, someone scrawled, "Royal tax consignment, touch and die." Probably a joke. Probably. You settle on a stone bench near the edge of what looks like a record-keeping depot. Inside, scribes stack tablets into cubbyholes like they're filing overdue library books. One cubby has a faded label reading, "Fish, Tithes, Year 28. Another reads, ominously, "Disputes, Goats." You lean closer as two scribes whisper about a recent scandal. Apparently, one collector's receipts didn't match his inventories. Half the barley he claimed to have, collected, had disappeared. Suspicious? Yes. Uncommon? Not at all. Receipt fraud wasn't just a risk. It was a career path. You follow a canal path now, and your nose catches the scent of fermenting dates. A barge unloads its cargo as a scribe counts and notes. 6 jars of date beer, 8 sacks of dates, 2 guards. A boy runs up, demanding his father's receipt. He needs it for the overseer. The scribe sighs, scribbles furiously, and presses a seal onto the wet clay. A quirky ritual among some temple officers. They'd perform year-end audits, pulling out all the tax receipts and reconciling them with the actual goods in storage. If things didn't add up, someone got demoted, or, in one case from Lhasa, transferred to Goat Patrol. That's not a punishment, it's a fate. You pause at a small shrine tucked between 2 warehouses. An offering bowl contains half-burnt incense and a cracked tablet. Someone's tax receipt, left as a kind of spiritual plea. Maybe it didn't add up, and they hoped the gods would overlook a missing jar of oil. You look at the horizon, the skies turning a soft bruised plum, the air thick with the scent of reeds and baked earth. The tax collectors are heading home, tablets slung in baskets on their backs. The scribes are yawning, stretching their styluses, muttering about overdue rations. One last thought before you move on. In this world, trust wasn't enough. Fairness didn't just happen. You needed proof. You needed clay. You needed someone to scratch your name into history and hand you that lumpy, awkward little square that, I said, you did your part. Because in ancient Mesopotamia, you didn't own peace of mind until you could hold it in your hand, and it weighed exactly half a barley ration. You wake with a soft jolt, not because anything loud has happened, but because the silence here is suddenly organized. The air is different, heavier somehow. You've left the clamoring tax streets behind and stepped into a large, walled compound. Cool shadows, smooth flagstones, the faint scratch of styluses on clay. This is no market, no depot. This is the temple archive, a place where receipts come to die, or more accurately, to live forever. Because receipts weren't just temporary here. In the temple economy, they were archived, cross-referenced, and reviewed for decades. You're now in the realm of clay librarians and bureaucratic monks, people who treated your 5-jar fish delivery like sacred scripture. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Mesopotamian temples were massive economic institutions. They weren't just places of worship. They were landlords, employers, grain silos, breweries, and yes, record keepers. Some temples managed thousands of workers and needed armies of scribes to track incoming and outgoing goods. You glance around and see stacks of baked tablets stored neatly on shelves. Not scrolls, not papyrus, not papyrus. Many tablets were stamped with time phrases. Due by new moon, recorded before spring harvest, filed within 12 days. One even says, delivered in urgency to palace before festival of lights. Translation, don't miss the deadline, or heads will metaphorically, or literally, roll. You reach a river crossing. The ferry is a flat-bottomed boat crewed by a boy who's definitely about to overcharge. Our courier pays with a small fish. Transaction complete. No receipt for this one. Or maybe there is, perhaps, the ferryman. Scribbles them down later. One fish received, safe crossing delivered, boat did not sink, this time. Crossing the river, the landscape changes. Marshy fields give way to dusty roads lined with prickly scrub. The sun's higher now, and you can almost feel the weight of that satchel, the constant slosh of ancient bureaucracy pressing against your side. The courier stops again, this time by a small shrine, a way station to leave a clay token, or mutter a quick prayer to Nabu, the god of wisdom and writing. Maybe he's hoping for safe passage. Maybe he's just stalling. Either way, he adjusts his strap and keeps walking. Not all receipts made it to their destinations. Archaeologists have found abandoned caches of undelivered tablets buried beside roads. Theories vary. Bandits, floods, or maybe just a courier who decided, you know what, I quit. In one dramatic case near Mari, a whole stash was found, hidden under a collapsed wall. Each tablet baked, sealed, and undelivered. Receipt purgatory. Eventually, you arrive with him at a walled estate, a palace outpost, maybe, or a tax bureau. A grumpy guard checks the courier's hands, then motions him inside. A senior scribe receives the satchel like it's gold. He takes one tablet, squints at the seal, nods, and mutters, "Finally, we've been waiting on this goat tally for days." You drift behind him into a large record room. This one smells of wax and wet clay. New tablets are sorted by city district. One basket reads, Lagash winter shipments. Another is just marked overdue. There's always an overdue pile. The courier's job is done. He accepts a small clay token as proof of delivery. A receipt for the receipt, if you will. Then he turns, adjusts his sandals, and begins the long walk back. And here's a strange little final note. Some tablets included travel records. Not for auditing, but for storytelling. Received 3 jars of honey from merchant Abil Adu, delivered by Enam, who crossed the river Dumuzi, fought off a jackal, and arrived before sundown. Dramatic, yes. Exaggerated, probably. But every now and then, a clay receipt doubles as an ancient action movie. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon, you watch the boy fade into the dust trail he carved coming here. Behind him lies a room full of proof. Every weight, every sheep, every last coin made real by scratch marks in clay. And whether it was a merchant's backup, a temple audit, or a courier's breathless delivery just before festival feast time, the message was always the same. This happened. This was real. You can trust it. Even now, thousands of years later, it still whispers that message from the brittle, sun-baked earth. By now, the scent of clay and dust is probably ingrained in your very soul. But don't worry. We're trading cracked tablets for something slightly softer. Clay envelopes. Yes, you heard that right. Envelopes made of clay. Because if you thought receipts were just about writing things down, you're about to discover Mesopotamians were low-key obsessed with sealing stuff in stuff. You step into a dim chamber tucked beneath a government storehouse. There's a chill here, and it's not from ghosts. It's from secrets. In your hands, someone presses a small, heavy object. It's smooth, rectangular, and sealed shut on all sides. You squint. Is that a clay tablet? Inside another clay tablet? Correct. You're holding a bulla, the Mesopotamian version of an envelope, except instead of paper, it's baked mud, wearing a mud jacket. Extremely low-tech. Unreasonably secure. Here's your mainstream historical fact. These clay envelopes were used to protect receipts, contracts, and other written records from tampering. You'd inscribe your tablet, say, a debt record or a shipment receipt, then wrap it in a thin layer of fresh clay. On the outer surface, you'd inscribe key identifiers and seal it with a cylinder seal. If the outer layer was broken or chipped, it meant someone had opened it, like breaking the wax on a medieval scroll, but crunchier. The idea was genius. You couldn't open the envelope without destroying it, so if someone brought you a bulla that looked a little too cracked, you could reasonably say, "Yeah, I'm not signing off on that goat delivery, pal." And here's the best part. Some bullae had duplicates of the inner tablet's information pressed onto the outer shell, like a primitive carbon copy, double recorded, just in case. The walls of this room are lined with shelves of unopened bullae. Little grey bricks, some marked with sharp wedges, others with faint spirals where seals were rolled. A few are broken open, revealing the smaller tablets inside, like cracking an egg to find another egg that's also tax-related. You pick up one that's particularly ornate. On the outside it says, "Barley shipment from Isin by order of the overseer," sealed with a rolling impression of a lion devouring a stag. Intense. The seal belonged to a merchant whose receipts were rumoured to always be correct. People trusted that lion. But here's a quirky tidbit. In some cases, the envelope contained no text at all, just small clay tokens, early symbolic counters. These were the true proto-receipts. Before writing, traders sealed little pebbles shaped like sheep or jars inside bully. "I gave you 5 sheep," it would imply. Break the bulla, count the sheep tokens, and you're set. We're talking BCE here. This practice predates writing by centuries. It's like Mesopotamian bubble wrap with algebra baked in. Eventually, the writing replaced the tokens. But some old-school traders still sealed a token or two, just in case. Ancient hoarders? Maybe. Or maybe they just didn't trust styluses alone. Historians still argue whether clay envelopes were used mostly for legal protection or for ceremonial reasons. Some believe the ritual of sealing and opening. These items had a kind of sacred weight, like locking away truth and unlocking it only under oath. Others say it was just bureaucracy, messy, crunchy bureaucracy. You lean in to examine a bulla with a particularly elaborate seal. It depicts two figures bowing before a goddess, probably Nisaba again, our patron saint of receipts and late night. Inventory reports, the seal is so crisp you can still see the ridges of the scribe's nail where he pressed the clay. A nearby scribe explains that these envelopes often travelled with traders or were submitted directly to a central authority. If there was ever a dispute, no, I swear I sent you 6 sheep, not 4. You could smash open the bulla, check the original tablet, and either clear your name or go straight into ancient debtors' shame. Some envelopes were filed without ever being opened, kept sealed as long as everyone honoured the contract. But if someone broke a deal, that bulla got cracked like a courtroom drama reveal. You're shown a shelf labelled "Opened during drought year." Inside, fragments of broken bullae and their matching tablets. Many of them deal with grain storage, late deliveries, missed payments. The crisis made people check the fine print. Some things never change. And yes, there were envelope scandals. Archaeologists found bullae where the inner tablet didn't match the outer shell. A trader might inscribe one thing inside, seal it up, then scratch a slightly altered version onto the surface, maybe to fudge a number or upgrade the quality of goods. When the outer seal broke and the inner truth spilled out, oof, welcome to ancient fraud. One fringe theory even suggests there were professional openers, people trained to crack a bulla cleanly and reseal it without leaving a trace. Historians aren't sold on this, but the idea of a sneaky clay forger lurking behind a granary is, undeniably, entertaining. Back in the chamber, you watch as a scribe carefully opens a sealed envelope under supervision. The room is silent. He uses a reed knife, delicately shaving the outer clay, revealing the tablet within. The final layer gives way with a snap, and there it is. Contract for 5 copper ingots, delivery deferred, agreed upon under full moon. Dated BCE. Still legible, still binding. You exhale. It's ridiculous and beautiful. A receipt inside an envelope, still keeping its promise after nearly 4,000 years. Who else can say that? You drift past a final display, a broken bulla, with tokens inside, 2 little clay sheep and a cylinder marked beer. Simple, tactile, real. The echoes of trade and trust sealed away for the ages. Just rows and rows of hardened clay, labelled with years, kings, and sometimes the weather. Flood year of Ishtar's smile, or year of the missing brick taxes. Poetic for accountancy. The building has the soft hush of a place that knows everything. You walk past an old man muttering over a cracked tablet, brushing dust out of the inscription with what might be a pigeon feather. He sees you and doesn't stop writing. The numbers he's checking? From years ago. That's how long this receipt system endured. This isn't just bookkeeping. It's the institutional memory of a civilization. And yes, historians still argue whether these temple records were kept purely for legal purposes, or also for spiritual ones. Did they think the gods might audit them? Some suggest the act of recording itself was sacred. The receipts, then, weren't just bureaucratic. They were offerings in clay form. You paid your barley and your devotion. The quiet here is occasionally broken by the sound of tablets being handled. Clink, scrape, breath. One young scribe carries a pile of records from the storeroom labelled "Cattle Transfers, Dynasty of Isin." Each tablet is heavy, dense, probably smells faintly of old temple and regret. A quirky detail for you. Mesopotamian archivists sometimes recycled tablets. If a contract had expired and no longer needed legal standing, it could be crushed and reshaped. But not always. Some receipts were kept so long, they had annotations added years later, reviewed in year 22, or contradicted by newer inventory. Imagine a grocery receipt with footnotes. You lean into one alcove where a scribe is copying older records onto new clay. Just in case the originals break, he murmurs. And yes, they broke. They cracked, especially if they weren't baked properly. Some temples even had tablet menders, people who would attempt to reassemble shattered records with water and clay glue. Receipt surgery. No joke. At one end of the chamber, you find a master scribe sitting in a raised seat, half hidden behind hanging reed mats. He has tablets from 5 decades spread before him. He's mapping out long-term grain deliveries from a farming estate 2 villages away. One receipt, dated BCE, reads, 30 measures of barley received from Ur-Shulgi, clean, dry, unspoiled. Below that, a tiny scribble, audit discrepancy, see year 1762. This is long-form accounting, people. We're in deep spreadsheet territory, and every cell is a tablet. Every formula is a prayer not to drop one. Some temples used portable ledgers, bundles of small receipts tied together with reed cords, each hole-punched clay piece like a very awkward keychain. The larger ones, though, remained on shelves sorted by date, type, or shape. Not every temple agreed on the best system. Some went chronological, others grouped by commodity. A few, honestly, might have just been freestyling. You move into a room that smells strongly of burnt clay. It's the backup vault. Here, only fully baked tablets are stored. The ones considered too important to risk damage. Legal disputes, tax rolls, land transfers. These were meant to last generations. You run your hand along one tablet that's been smoothed with what looks like animal fat to keep the edges from flaking. Now that's some tender loving accountancy. Another fun tidbit. Temple archives occasionally included fake receipts used for training scribes. One charming example. Received 1 moonbeam, 6 dreams, and a bucket of wind. Scribe humor. Even in BCE, someone was tired of copying barley lists and needed a little flair. Back out in the courtyard, a novice scribe practices reciting old transactions from memory. His mentor listens, occasionally interrupting, "No, 22 sheep, not 23. And you forgot the oil jug." You sympathize. It's basically the Mesopotamian version of cramming for finals. A wind picks up and rattles the palm fronds overhead. Somewhere, a tablet drops. There's a collective gasp. Everyone pauses. It's, okay, just a training piece. Everyone exhales. And here's the thing. These receipts didn't just vanish. Modern archaeologists have uncovered thousands, tens of thousands of tablets just like the ones you're seeing. Many were preserved because they were baked in accidental fires when buildings collapsed. So yes, some of the best kept records from ancient Mesopotamia exist today thanks to utterly catastrophic urban disasters. Every ancient accountant's nightmare is now a historian's dream. You find one last room, a dark, cool chamber with locked storage boxes. These are for restricted receipts, disputed contracts, forgotten debts, payouts so large they're borderline embarrassing. One lid is marked with a warning, not to be opened except by temple overseer. You chuckle, the ancient equivalent of a VIP ledger. You sit for a moment, surrounded by 4,000 years of bureaucracy. All of it built on trust, sure, but verified by the humble, awkward, astonishing clay receipt. They weren't pretty, they weren't fast, but they were undeniable. And in this echoing temple vault, still watched over by the goddess Nisaba and her dusty cadre of stylus-wielding disciples, you can feel that weight, that gravity, the quiet satisfaction of a job recorded, a transaction sealed, a debt fulfilled. You close your eyes. For a moment, your breath sinks with the rhythms of scribes long gone. You wonder what they'd say if they knew someone would be reading their receipts aloud, in the dark, 2 millennia later. Probably. Finally, some recognition. You blink slowly as the archive's hush fades into a different sort of silence, open, sunlit, wide. You've stepped beyond the temple's shadow and into the fields again. But don't worry, this isn't another barley inspection. No, this time you're following a delivery boy. Or more accurately, a delivery teenager who's doing the ancient equivalent of an intercity courier run. Because for all the dusty ledgers and baked receipts, Mesopotamian record-keeping wasn't just about storing information, it was also about moving it. Tonight, you drift into the world of clay on the move, where receipts had legs, or at least someone else's legs carrying them down long roads under a blistering sun. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In large cities like Lagash, and Babylon, receipts weren't always filed on site. Many were dispatched to central authorities, palaces, temples, or regional treasuries, for review, record, or audit. That meant someone had to physically carry these clay tablets across sometimes dozens of miles. You trail behind the courier now. His tunic is dust-colored, a water skin flaps at his side, and he carries a sealed satchel of hard-baked receipts. You can hear them clinking softly together, a little clay symphony of tax compliance. Scholars still argue whether these couriers were formally employed or just press-ganged temple apprentices. Some think they belonged to specialized classes, trusted messengers trained to navigate city roads and village paths. Others argue they were just whoever could walk the fastest without losing a tablet. And yes, those tablets could be fragile. Rain, disaster, dropping one on stone could shatter it into a guilt-ridden confetti. And if you lost one, you didn't just lose a receipt, you risked undoing an entire transaction. Some messengers reportedly carried their receipts in padded, leather cases. Others didn't. Some receipts even mention replacement clauses. If lost in transit, responsibility lies with sender. Harsh. The boy you follow stops at a rest station, little more than a covered bench and a water pot. A goat stares at him judgmentally, because goats always do. He pulls out a small tablet to inspect the seal, still intact. That seal might belong to a merchant, a temple scribe, or even a royal treasurer. See, Mesopotamian receipts weren't always just plain scribbles. They were often sealed with personal cylinder seals, those little carved stone rollers that left intricate impressions. One look at the pattern, and you could tell who'd issued or approved the receipt. No signature needed, just roll your name in spirals. A quirky but delightful fact. Some couriers were so paranoid about thieves or accidents, they traveled with clay duplicates, decoy tablets. These were inscribed with gibberish or irrelevant data and sealed with fake impressions. The idea? If bandits stopped you and stole your documents, you could say, "Here, take these," while your real receipts were hidden in a second satchel. Mesopotamian misdirection at its finest. You and the courier pass through a village checkpoint. A guard waves him through, familiar with his dusty sandals and perpetually annoyed face. "Another audit run?" he asks. The boy grunts, shrugs, and points to the satchel. The guard nods like he's just witnessed a tragedy, because receipts had deadlines too. That part hasn't changed in 5,000 years. 5,000 years. And now, the room darkens as the sun sets through a high-slit window. Shadows stretch across the shelves like long-forgotten agreements still waiting to be honored. You realize the Mesopotamians didn't just invent receipts. They invented the trust envelope, physical proof that someone said what they meant, and meant what they said, and all of it made of dirt. Your breath slows as you leave the envelope room, a little clay-dusted and a lot contemplative. But don't get too cozy, we're heading into even more thrilling territory. Get ready to trudge through the dry corridors of Mesopotamian audits. Yes, audits. It's like tax season, except your abacus is made of pebbles, and if you mess up, someone might confiscate your goats. You're not walking alone. You're trailing behind a temple administrator who's just been summoned for a yearly inventory review. He doesn't look thrilled. He's sweating through his linen tunic and muttering curses that sound suspiciously like prayers. His sandals slap nervously against the hot clay as you enter a long hall lined with, even more receipts. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The temples and palaces of Mesopotamia didn't just keep receipts. They actively audited them. Records were reviewed against physical inventories, labor output, and past transactions to detect theft, fraud, or just good old-fashioned incompetence. They cross-referenced what had been promised with what actually showed up. Some audits happened monthly. Others were annual, and a few were triggered by suspicion, like when barley stores mysteriously ran low, or a tax shipment arrived late and smelled vaguely of fermented fish. Your administrator friend stops at a stone bench and produces a bulla from his satchel. He hands it to the scribe in charge of the audit, who eyes the seal with the weariness of someone who's had one too many grain-counting disputes this week. 3 baskets of barley, the scribe mutters, cracking the clay seal with a practiced flick. He pulls out the inner tablet and begins comparing it to a wooden tally stick, a sort of Mesopotamian spreadsheet with notches carved along its length. Scholars still argue whether these audits were purely economic or partly ritualistic. Was it just about numbers? Or was there a sacred obligation to keep the temple's flow of goods and services pure as a kind of offering to the gods? Some believe audits were timed to religious festivals, as if showing your books clean was a form of spiritual hygiene. Meanwhile, the scribe's reed pen scratches furiously. He asks pointed questions. Why were the barley jars half-weighted this time? Where's the delivery confirmation for last month's goat shipment? This says workers. Why are they only on today's roll? And here comes a fringe tidbit you didn't expect. One set of recovered tablets from Nippur includes a complaint letter attached to an audit. The scribe wrote, "This is the 3rd time the same laborer is listed under different names. I suspect trickery." Mesopotamian identity fraud, folks. Right there in cuneiform. You step past the ledgers and into the physical stockroom, where the real-world counterparts of all those receipts sit. Barley baskets, oil jars, and ropes tied around livestock necks. Each item has a little clay tag hanging from it, like a price label at a slightly cursed flea market. The scribe checks tags against tablets. If something doesn't match, it's recorded, but not immediately punished. Auditors in Mesopotamia weren't always enforcers. They simply flagged issues for higher-ups. Which means, yes, ancient bureaucrats had bosses too. Probably very grouchy bosses with massive rings and zero patience for missing sheep. There's even evidence of corrective receipts, tablets inscribed after an audit to acknowledge mistakes or update records. One example reads, "Shortfall in copper noted, discrepancy approved by supervisor, temple not liable." Basically, oops, we fixed it. Please don't smite us. You watch as your temple administrator sweats through a recount of ceramic jars. 2 are missing. His eyes twitch. He suggests they broke during the last full moon. The scribe raises an eyebrow but says nothing. The moon, it seems, is a popular excuse. Some audits involve teams. Archaeologists have found tablets bearing multiple seals, meaning several officials had to sign off on the same data, like a really annoying group project, but in clay. You move down a hallway into a quieter chamber where the rejected receipts are stored. Yes, rejected. Some were deemed fraudulent, miscalculated, or irrelevant. They're not destroyed, just set aside. You peer into the bin. A cracked tablet reads, "Goat received, but transaction not witnessed." Another simply says, "Invalid weight, measure retaken." And this is where things get a little sad. Some receipts were carved meticulously, perfect wedges, pristine clay, but filed in the unverified pile forever. Imagine pouring your soul into a document, only to have it declared useless because someone lost the audit copy. In another corner, you spot what may be the most relatable tablet of all time. It reads, "Worker absent, no barley ration given, said to be ill, second occurrence." A Mesopotamian HR memo. They were watching, always. One rare but delightful discovery. In the audit archives is a tablet marked with a single word, lies. That's it. Just that. No other markings. Historians still debate whether it was a rejected tablet, a clerical note, or some poor scribe's breaking point. As the audit continues, you step outside for air. The sun is low, casting the shadow of the temple over the village like a slow-moving lid. From somewhere, a sheep bleats indignantly, possibly over a miscounted weight. And it hits you. This wasn't just administration. This was the performance of accuracy, the ritual of accountability, writing it, checking it, sealing it, opening it, and then facing a room full of skeptical auditors who don't care if the road was muddy or the goat got sick. They want the numbers to add up. Because in Mesopotamia, a receipt wasn't just a record. It was a promise. And audits. They were the reckoning. You walk back into the dusty corridor, the sounds of scribes and squabbling barley traders echoing behind you. Somewhere in the dark, a new receipt is being carved. Somewhere else, an old one is being questioned. And all across this crumbling world of sun-dried contracts and carefully numbered jars, the message is the same. Write it down, check it twice, and never underestimate the power of a suspicious scribe. You stretch your legs as you shuffle away from the clutches of the temple audit room, your brain now full of barley counts and suspicious goats. But don't relax just yet, because now we're plunging straight into the thrilling depths of Mesopotamian bureaucracy, that's right, paperwork, ancient style, or more accurately, claywork. You find yourself wandering into an administrative archive, a sprawling hall where clay tablets outnumber people, and the air smells like baked dirt and chronic skepticism. Everywhere you look, scribes sit at low benches, styluses twitching, chins tilted with concentration. Some are teenagers, nervously double-checking wedge strokes. Others are veterans, carving with the elegance of a man who's issued the same sheep count receipt for years and has given up dreaming of promotion. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mesopotamian cities like and Lagash developed complex administrative systems, complete with departments for grain, labor, building materials, livestock, and even irrigation oversight. There were full, bureaucratic hierarchies, with low-level scribes reporting to overseers, who reported to temple managers, who reported to the high priest or king. The ancient version of, "Your request has been escalated." And if you're wondering, yes, they had inboxes. Literally, clay trays for incoming tablets and others for outgoing ones. It's not email, but it's close enough to give you heartburn. As you sidestep around a stack of new tablets, you notice something intriguing. Each department has its own tablet style. Grain division, long rectangular tablets with columns. Livestock, reports, square blocks with tiny pictographs. Labor assignments, compact ovals with timestamps. It's like each team had their own font and signature stationery. Now, for a quirky tidbit, one recovered tablet from a royal archive contains what's basically a form letter template. Just blank spaces for name, amount, and date, which means yes, someone, somewhere in BCE, invented the Mesopotamian fill-in-the-blank form. Take that. Microsoft Word. Historians still argue whether these bureaucratic systems were more about genuine oversight or symbolic control. Was it efficiency or just performative organization? Did they need all this redundancy, or was it a status game, showing off how many tablets you could pile up behind your desk without being crushed? You trail behind a young scribe who's rushing between departments. She carries a wooden box filled with tablets wrapped in straw for protection. One of them falls, and she curses in a way that definitely wouldn't please the goddess Nisaba. You help her gather the pieces, and she mutters thanks before disappearing into the livestock office, where the door is, naturally, shaped like a cow. The livestock records are chaotic. You spot a wall chart with the cuneiform equivalent of tally marks, goats, cows, oxen, pigs. A scribe is busy documenting a recent shipment, muttering as he copies information from a delivery receipt. 3 cows, 2 missing horns, 1 pregnant, confirmed by supervisor. You don't want to ask too many questions about how the cows were checked for pregnancy. Everywhere you look, bureaucracy clings like dust. There's a clerk just for counting clay rations, which were small lump sums of clay distributed to junior scribes so they could write their daily quota. One guy runs a complaints table where people line up to lodge grievances, from unfair barley portions to accusations of mud theft. Yes, mud theft. Apparently, some people were stealing construction clay and reselling it. You pass a tablet labeled, "Request for additional reeds. Current supply too brittle." Ancient stationery problems. We've all been there. Nearby, a scribe is teaching his apprentice how to copy lists without altering the text. No flair, he warns, pointing sternly. This isn't poetry, it's a document. The apprentice sighs and obediently scratches out a list of identical fish deliveries. And you thought your job was dull. Back in the main chamber, you reach the central filing shelves. These aren't just neat stacks. They're sorted by date, sender, and department, sometimes even cross-tagged by type of transaction. Think of it as a dusty analog database. You pick up a tablet tagged with 3 different symbols: a barley sheaf, a crescent moon, and a seal impression shaped like a bird. That means barley ration, issued during the new moon, authorized by overseer. Damu. You can practically hear the filing clerks sighing in satisfaction. And now for something less satisfying. An entire section of the archive labeled Lost Causes. These are partial tablets, fragmented records, or disputed receipts that no one ever resolved. One has a line that trails off mid-sentence. 5 jars of sesame oil were delivered on, and then nothing. Like the Mesopotamian version of an unsent draft email. There's even a whole tablet of corrections, listing clerical mistakes and issuing clarifications. It reads like an ancient version of customer service notes. Correction. Bronze weight, mislisted on prior document. Correct amount is minas. Error in name spelling of worker. Should be Enlil Bani, not Enlil Bani Sag. And, possibly the best entry, ignore previous message. Goat has been found. A particularly harried clerk passes you by, dropping a tablet that reads, "Double delivery of sheep feed due to duplicate order. Please advise." You hand it back to him and he groans. Again? Ancient bureaucracy had all the same fun. We do. Typos, double entries, forgotten receipts, and people who swear they sent something that mysteriously never showed up. Here's something even weirder. Some cities appear to have had document quotas, as in, write 5 receipts a day, or lose your temple lunch ration. There are signs of padding, receipts for unnecessary tasks, or wildly detailed memos like, 3 hours spent watching over the barley. All was quiet. Wind direction, north. That's either commitment or creative survival. Historians debate whether Mesopotamian bureaucracy was the cornerstone of its civilization or the slow sludge that dragged it down. Some believe the sheer volume of documentation allowed these early cities to scale and thrive. Others think it became so bloated, it needed its own scribes just to manage the scribes. You finally sit down near a quiet shelf, flipping through dull entries like clay molds requested, 5 delivered. Oil measured twice, amount unchanged. New styluses distributed, training commenced. And slowly, as the sun spills across the tablet shelves and the room hums with the sound of writing and complaints and sighs, it becomes clear bureaucracy wasn't just a job. It was a belief system, a devotion to order through mud, to the holy art of saying, "See, I wrote it down, therefore it happened." So next time someone groans about paperwork, just remember, it could be worse. You could be writing receipts with a stick in wet dirt for a boss who thinks barley audits are a lifestyle. You step out from the buzzing administrative archive, feeling the weight of countless clay tablets pressing in on your thoughts. But the story isn't over. You're about to enter the world of Mesopotamian contracts and legal receipts, where promises were made, broken, and sometimes hilariously notarized with the threat of curses. It's a busy market day, and the smell of fresh dates mingles with dust and animal sweat. You spot a merchant, a robust man in a linen robe, pacing nervously beside a table cluttered with seals and tablets. Today, he's not just selling goods, he's signing contracts, written agreements sealed with clay to bind deals. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mesopotamians developed one of the earliest legal systems, including detailed contracts for sales, loans, marriages, and property. Each contract was carefully recorded on clay tablets, often with witness signatures impressed by cylinder seals. This system is the ancestor of modern legal receipts. You watch as the merchant presses his personal seal into warm clay, a symbol as unique as a fingerprint. These seals were carved with intricate designs, lions, gods, or abstract patterns. They weren't just decoration, they guaranteed authenticity. Without your seal, your contract was as worthless as soggy bread. Now the quirky tidbit. Some contracts, included curses against anyone who dared break the agreement. One such tablet threatens, "May the gods tear out your tongue and make your house collapse." Not exactly a gentle reminder to pay up, but effective enough in a world where divine wrath was a real concern. Historians still debate whether these curses were standard legal language or genuine attempts at supernatural enforcement. Were they solemn warnings, or more like ancient legal boilerplate? Either way, the idea that breaking a receipt could summon a deity's fury adds a layer of cosmic seriousness to your grocery list. You overhear the merchant negotiating a loan contract. The terms are complex: a fixed interest rate payable in barley, with collateral in the form of his date palm orchard. The contract lists all parties, terms, and the date down to the lunar cycle. It's incredibly detailed, more than most modern loan agreements you've seen. Across the street, a farmer is signing a contract to sell a goat. The tablet meticulously describes the goat's age, color, health, and even temperament. If the goat bleats excessively or refuses to eat, the contract notes, the buyer may return it within 7 days. Quality control, Mesopotamian style. You notice the crowd gathers around a particularly ornate tablet, a marriage contract. It specifies dowry amounts, responsibilities, and the division of property should things go sideways. Like a modern prenup, but written in cuneiform and with divine witnesses. Some contracts also served as receipts of payment, proof that a debt was settled or goods delivered. These receipt contracts were often brief, simply noting the transaction, date, and seals of involved parties. One recovered tablet stands out. It's a contract to lend silver, signed by a woman, remarkably rare in that era. Women's legal roles varied, but here she's an active participant, negotiating terms and sealing her agreement. A small but telling glimpse of gender roles in ancient law. You turn your attention to a tablet labeled Dispute Resolution. It describes a case where a buyer claimed a shipment of wool was faulty. The contract was re-examined, witnesses called, and a decision reached. The tablet ends with a note. Both parties accept the ruling. Peace is restored. That sounds familiar, kind of like a Mesopotamian small claims court. Historians argue whether these legal receipts served more as preventive tools or reactive measures. Were contracts mostly about trust building or about providing a legal fallback when trust failed? The merchant next to you laughs nervously, recounting a case where a debtor tried to forge a seal to escape repayment. The scribe who caught it wrote a sarcastic note on the tablet. "Nice try, but not today, friend." As you wander through this legal maze, you realize these receipts weren't just about business. They were about order, trust, and accountability. In a world without smartphones or emails, a hand-carved clay tablet might have been the only proof you had that a deal was done fairly, and, just like today, sometimes the biggest fear wasn't the deal itself, but the paperwork that followed. Leaving the marketplace and legal chambers behind, you find yourself stepping into the quieter realm of Mesopotamian education and the teaching of receipts, where scribes in training sat cross-legged in schools called edubus, learning the sacred art of recording transactions with precision. The room smells of baked clay and reed styluses, mingling with the faint aroma of dusty papyrus-like leaves. You spot rows of young apprentices hunched over small clay tablets, their fingers awkwardly shaping wedge marks under the watchful eye of a grizzled master scribe. The air hums with a mix of concentration, frustration, and the occasional whispered curse. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Aduba was essentially the ancient equivalent of a trade school, where boys, and rarely girls, were trained to become professional scribes. Their curriculum was comprehensive, covering language, mathematics, accounting, and of course, the art of drafting receipts, contracts, and administrative records. It was a prestigious but grueling path to social mobility. You observe one young scribe laboriously copying a receipt for barley delivery. His tutor inspects the tablet with a sharp eye, pointing out errors in the wedge angles and urging precision. A misaligned stroke can change 3 to 30, he warns, and that could cost a farmer his herd. No pressure, A quirky tidbit. Some tablets reveal scribes' playful mistakes, incorrect symbols, misspellings, or even humorous doodles squeezed into margins. One apprentice's tablet features a tiny cuneiform cat chasing a mouse. Apparently, ancient students had a sense of humor, though the master scribe didn't find it as funny. Historians still debate the exact methods used to teach these apprentices. Did they learn primarily by copying models? Were there oral recitations? Or were they taught through a form of memorization and repetition that today would qualify as ancient rote learning? The answer remains murky, buried beneath layers of clay and time. You watch as the master scribe dictates a mock transaction, while the students rush to carve their versions. 5 goats for grain, delivered to the temple granary, he intones. The room echoes with the scratching of styluses and the low murmurs of counting. The curriculum included extensive practice on numerical systems, sexagesimal math, which is base 60 counting. This complex system allowed scribes to keep detailed accounts of goods, weights, and measures. It's the reason we have seconds in a minute and degrees in a circle, but more on that later. Your eye catches a worn tablet where a student painstakingly records an inventory list, replete with corrections and margin notes. You realize these tablets served dual purposes, practice and reference, students' workbooks in a way. You glimpse a rare tablet, a student's final exam. It includes a full receipt, a contract, and a letter of complaint. Passing meant proving mastery over multiple document types. Failing, well, you didn't get to keep your stylus for the day. The social status of scribes was significant. They were the gatekeepers of information and power. Yet, the work was repetitive and demanding. Some texts lament the long hours and the clay dust in the lungs. Apparently, even 4 years ago, people complained about their desk jobs. A fringe tidbit. Certain schools had specialized instructors for seal carving, teaching apprentices how to make their own personal cylinder seals to authenticate their work. Seal making was an art requiring skill, patience, and a steady hand. You notice that the schools also taught etiquette, how to interact with temple officials, how to handle clients, and even how to compose polite letters. Being a scribe wasn't just about penmanship, it was about diplomacy and discretion. Historians debate the degree to which scribal education was standardized across Mesopotamia. Was there a universal curriculum, or did each city have its own scribal traditions and specialties? The tablets hint at both unity and diversity. You finally leave the Aduba as the sun dips low. In the fading light, you realize something profound. The ancient receipt was not just a business tool, it was the product of generations of intense training, artistic skill, and intellectual rigor. So next time you grumble over a receipt, spare a thought for those young Mesopotamian scribes, crammed into tiny classrooms, carving wedge after wedge, shaping the foundations of record-keeping with tired fingers and hopeful hearts. Emerging from the disciplined halls of the Aduba, you find yourself drawn toward a quieter, more mysterious corner of Mesopotamian life, the world of religious receipts and temple economies, where the sacred and the practical blend in curious ways. The temple is alive with hushed chants and the scent of incense burning low. Priests in flowing robes move solemnly among piles of offerings, grain, oil, animals, each accounted for meticulously. These aren't just gifts, they're recorded transactions, vital to the temple's operation. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Temples in ancient Mesopotamia were massive economic centers, controlling large tracts of land, employing workers, and managing extensive resources. Everything was tracked through detailed receipts, often inscribed on tablets stored in temple archives. You notice a tablet recording a shipment of barley given as an offering to the goddess Inanna. The receipt specifies amounts, dates, and the names of donors, sometimes even noting the social status of the giver. Temples were not only religious hubs, but also financial powerhouses. A quirky tidbit: some receipts include offerings of rather unusual items, like baskets of chicken feathers or jars of fragrant perfume. Priests believed even the smallest gift mattered, and every receipt served as proof that the gods were properly honored. Historians still debate the exact role of these receipts in religious practice. Were they purely administrative, or did they carry spiritual significance as contracts with the divine? Did the gods really keep accounts in a metaphysical sense? The answer remains elusive, lost among prayers and ledger lines. You watch as a priest supervises the distribution of rations to temple workers, issuing clay tokens as receipts for labor performed. Workers use these to claim goods from temple storerooms, forming a complex internal economy. The temple's archive holds a fascinating collection of receipt ledgers, listing everything from donations to expenses, including payments for repairing sacred buildings or buying ritual supplies. It's a glimpse into the temple's vast bureaucratic machine. A particularly intriguing receipt documents a penalty paid by a priest for breaking a ritual taboo. The punishment: a fine in barley and oil carefully recorded with a note of contrition. Even holy men had to settle their debts. You notice seals pressed into many tablets, some bearing the marks of high priests, others of temple accountants. Each seal certified the transaction's validity, ensuring no offerings went unrecorded or unacknowledged. In one corner, a tablet details a bequest left to a temple by a wealthy citizen. Land, livestock, and precious metals, all inventoried with precise measurements. Such donations helped sustain temple functions and reinforce social ties. The Yusem atmosphere is solemn, yet surprisingly practical. Behind the incense and hymns, the temple functions like a corporate office with divine flair, and every receipt serves as a bridge between earthly duties and heavenly expectations, a fringe detail. Some scholars suggest that temples used receipts not just for record keeping, but also as spiritual tools, binding agreements with gods that promise protection or curses if broken. The lines between legal contract and religious vow blur. You glimpse a receipt that reads like a prayer. May this barley nourish the goddess and bless the city. It's part transaction, part devotional act, a reminder that even the humblest receipt carried deep meaning. Historians debate whether temple economies helped stabilize Mesopotamian society or contributed to its complexity and eventual bureaucratic overload. Temples wielded enormous power, and their receipt systems were both the backbone and potential choke point. As you step away, the chanting fades behind you, replaced by the sounds of city life. The temple receipts have told their story of gods and grain, power and piety, numbers and nuance, etched forever in clay. Back in the bustle of the broader city, you trail behind a trader hauling jars of date syrup toward the harbor. The path leads to the watery edge of Mesopotamian commerce, receipts, in trade and transportation, where contracts didn't just sit in storerooms, but followed goods as they flowed across rivers and dusty roads. The port is loud with shouting voices, creaking carts, and the lapping of boats against the stone dock. You spot scribes stationed near the gangplanks, tablets at the ready, styluses poised like tiny swords in clay. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mesopotamia's trade networks spanned from the Indus Valley to Anatolia, and receipts were central to managing this vast web of movement. From tracking shipments to confirming deliveries, written records help maintain trust across long distances. One trader clutches a tablet that records the shipment of lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. The tablet lists weight, quality, carrier, name, and destination. A receipt like this served not just as proof of transaction, but as a kind of ancient shipping label, part Amazon, part insurance policy. You step aside as a team of donkeys clops past, their cargo carefully labelled with clay tags, some bearing basic pictograms, others marked with cuneiform. These were bulla, or enclosed tokens, precursors to receipts that tracked contents sealed inside a pouch. Practical, if not exactly barcode scannable. A quirky tidbit: some bulla contained little tokens shaped like animals or commodities. Break the bulla open and you'd find, say, a tiny clay sheep or barley wedge. It was like cracking open a piñata full of inventory. historians still debate whether these token-based systems survived alongside tablets or were fully replaced by cuneiform. The overlap suggests a transitional phase, Mesopotamians evolving their receipt game while still hedging their bets with tiny clay lambs. You overhear a heated conversation near a boat carrying cedar wood from Lebanon. The captain insists the cargo is intact. The merchant wants proof. Out comes a clay tablet with a list. Type of wood, number of planks, seal of origin. It's signed and stamped before departure and expected to match an arrival tablet at the other end. This isn't just bookkeeping, it's accountability on a river current. If the planks arrive short, someone's reputation sinks with the missing timber. You notice scribes acting as neutral witnesses. Their job? Record every shipment, resolve disputes, and sometimes arbitrate arguments over spilled olive oil or stolen fish. Think ancient UPS clerks with a divine mandate. A particularly detailed receipt tracks a shipment of woolen garments to Elam. It includes delivery instructions, estimated transit time, and a clause noting weather delays. Yes, even in BCE, people complained about slow shipping. You spot a battered tablet marked with signs of reused clay. Apparently, receipts were sometimes smoothed over and rewritten, a practice that horrifies historians given the amount of information lost. But hey, when clay's scarce, you recycle. One curious merchant shows you his travel ledger, multiple receipts linked by seals, and a long chain of transactions. It's the closest thing to a shipping manifest, scribbled in tight cuneiform across 5 small tablets tucked in a leather pouch. Ancient logistics, brought to you by dusty fingers and stubborn donkeys. Historians still argue whether these receipts reflect a highly organized bureaucratic trade system or a patchwork of local customs. Some tablets suggest remarkable standardization, others pure chaos written in mud. You glance toward a reed barge being loaded with jars of honey. A scribe quickly jots down the quantity, expected arrival point, and swear by Marduk clause. If the honey gets diluted or stolen, someone's going to get cursed and fined. A fringe insight. A few tablets record the names of female merchants, overseeing shipments and demanding receipts. While rare, these examples challenge assumptions about gender roles in Mesopotamian commerce. As the sun lowers behind the ziggurat skyline, you realize receipts weren't static. They moved, just like the goods they tracked. They floated on rivers, bounced in carts, and crossed borders with the faith that a few wedge-shaped marks could protect livelihoods across miles of dangerous terrain. You walk back through the market, past donkeys and dockhands, wondering what today's delivery driver might say if they had to seal every box with a tiny, curse-inscribed clay tablet. You round a corner in the heart of Babylon, where the administrative buzz gradually gives way to an almost hypnotic order. A vast archive room often called the Babylonian filing cabinet. Here, thousands of clay receipts are meticulously sorted and filed away, and you can almost hear the whisper of records stacked one upon another, like ancient lullabies. As you step into the cool interior, the atmosphere shifts from the lively chaos of the marketplace to the methodical hum of bureaucracy that defies both time and madness. Rows upon rows of clay tablets, each bearing the marks of commerce and governance, stretch before you in carefully arranged shelves and carved niches. The scene is nothing short of astonishing. Countless records chronicling grain deliveries, livestock transactions, temple offerings, trade shipments, and every other snippet of economic life you can imagine. All sorted with such precision that it seems the scribes never once feared going completely mad. Instead, they embraced an obsessive commitment to order, carving out a system that could corral the chaos of an entire civilization. You move slowly along an aisle, your eyes tracing the neat columns of entries. Every tablet is carefully labeled with a series of symbols that denote the date, the commodity, and the issuing authority. Some shelves are organized chronologically, others by commodity type, and still others by the issuing temple or city precinct. The sheer volume of information is overwhelming, yet strangely comforting. Here, every transaction finds its rightful place, forever captured in the medium of hardened clay. A veteran scribe, leaning on a carved wooden cane and donning a tunic frayed at the edges from years of work. glances at you from behind a low bench. With a raspy smile and a shake of his head, he murmurs, "We did it. Day in and day out. No, receipt left behind." There is an air of benign satisfaction in his words, as if the act of filing these records was itself a kind of art form. Every tablet is not merely a record, it is a part of a living memory that sustains the city's commerce, spirituality, and governance. In one corner, you catch sight of a particularly elaborate filing system, a set of multi-tiered shelves that seems almost like a labyrinth built for clay rather than for people. Each level is marked by a small stone slab with a cuneiform inscription indicating a category. A listing for grain imports, another for temple offerings, one for local trade, disputes and so on. You pause in front of a shelf labelled Debits and Credits, Season of the Great Harvest. Here, receipts detail not only the actual transfer of goods, but also record adjustments made after a long day's audit. There, scribes had made minute corrections and added annotations in the margins. They scribbled small reminders, balancing, entries just like a modern-day accountant would with endless spreadsheets. You move on, noting that each tablet is physically integrated into the filing cabinet. Many have been embedded into slots carved directly into the mud brick walls. In some cases, the tablets are stacked in carefully constructed clay boxes that act like drawers, each one sealed with a small cylinder seal. You marvel at the ingenuity, rather than storing every single tablet loose and at risk of scattering. In the wind, these records were housed in built-in storage that was designed to protect them against both decay and the occasional misadventure. A curious detail captures your attention. Some tablets, although seemingly identical, have subtle differences in the way their inscriptions are laid out. You learn that this was no accident. Different regions of Babylon had developed their own filing practices, so when scribes from outlying districts turned in their records, they were reclassified and sometimes even re-engraved to match the central system's codex. The process was painstaking, requiring multiple layers of verification, and sometimes the same document would receive a second inscription, almost like an ancient fingerprint, to ensure authenticity and consistency. A young apprentice, still, in the early days of his scribal career, sits at a small workbench near the filing cabinets. He hunches over a fresh tablet, carefully replicating the exact format of the master file, practicing his alignment and spacing so that his work can one day join the public archive. The scribe overseeing his work nods approvingly as he spots each meticulously placed wedge. This attention to detail is essential. Even a slight misalignment could cause legal disputes centuries later when someone reopens a contract from an epoch long gone. Amid the quiet, a soft, steady rhythmic scratching of styluses on clay provides the only soundtrack to the filing room. It is an almost meditative sound, a symphony of bureaucracy where the repetitive patterns of registration, annotation, and filing create a cadence that lulls you into a state of near trance. You can almost imagine that every clack of a reed, stylus is both a record of a transaction and a beat in the pulse of the ancient city. You eventually find yourself in front of a large, ornate filing box reserved for the most important records, the kind that detail royal decrees, major land, transfers, and temple endowments. This VIP cabinet is safeguarded by a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. The door bears an inscription so finely chiseled that it catches the light and shimmers with promise. Only the highest-ranking officials and the most trusted scribes were granted access, a privilege that underscored the power the filing system wielded in Babylonian society. Time seems to stretch out as you absorb the enormity of what you're witnessing. You realize that this system wasn't merely about keeping receipts, it was about creating an enduring framework for civilization. In every carefully filed tablet was embedded the collective memory of the city, a promise that transactions, however mundane they might seem, be it the exchange of a few shekels of barley or the signing of a major trade pact, would be remembered, authenticated, and revisited as needed. It was order imposed upon the chaos of daily life, offering a kind of solace to both rulers and commoners. You take a deep breath and let your eyes wander over the countless tablets, imagining the countless hands that had meticulously sorted, labeled, and sealed them. Each one is a small testament to the ancient belief that to record a transaction is to create a bond that transcends time, ensuring that nothing is forgotten, nothing is lost. In this grand, dusty archive, chaos has been subdued by the artful discipline of organization, proving that even in the ancient world, sanity could be maintained one tablet at a time. As you step back into the warm Babylonian sunlight, the image of the colossal filing cabinet lingers in your mind like a comforting promise. A promise that long after the dust has settled on kings and empires, the tiny, persistent marks in clay will continue to tell their story. You move now through the twilight hush of a private residence, not royal, not priestly, just an average home on a quiet street in Ur. And here, in the most unassuming of spaces, you discover something that shifts your understanding completely. Receipts weren't only the tools of kings and temples. They were woven into the daily routines of everyday Mesopotamians, right down to the laundry line. Inside the low mud brick walls, the air smells faintly of baked dates and dust. A woman kneels at a hearth, tossing flatbread onto a hot stone, while her teenage son smooths a small clay tablet with the back of his hand. He's preparing a receipt for a neighbor who just bought a handful of lentils. No scribal academy, no pomp, just neighbor-to-neighbor commerce written in clay and dry hands. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many Mesopotamian cities, personal and household transactions were often recorded informally using simplified cuneiform or pictographic shorthand. These domestic receipts tracked small loans, trades, even agreements about borrowed animals or borrowed grain. The tablet the boy is working on will dry by nightfall, after which it'll be tucked into a wall niche alongside a dozen others, each a micro-chronicle of the family's economic footprint. One names the midwife who helped deliver a second child and received 2 fish in return. Another records a borrowed blanket to be returned before the moon turns. Some are even written on repurposed potsherds, ancient receipts on the Mesopotamian version of post-it notes. You peer into the alcove and count a surprising number of these household records. Some still bear thumbprints or soft impressions of string ties. They may not hold up in a court of law, but in a neighborhood dispute, they're gold. Here's a fringe tidbit. Archaeologists have uncovered domestic tablets with embedded pebbles or rice grains pressed into the surface, possibly as rudimentary tracking tools. It's unclear if they were decorative, symbolic, or proto-counting aids, but it makes you picture ancient mums reminding their kids, count your pebbles before lending out another chicken. Historians still argue whether these informal records were ever standardized, or if they existed entirely outside formal oversight. Some suspect local scribes offered receipt writing as a side hustle, like modern notaries, while others think many families just made up their own formats and hoped the neighbors respected the effort. You walk through the home's central courtyard, where a small garden pushes up green stalks from the parched ground. Near the plants, a clay tag lies tied to a wooden stake. It bears a single name and the number of days since the last water. Share. Turns out, even irrigation between neighbors had its own receipt logic. Water was life. And if you skipped your turn, someone was writing it down. Not far away, a shelf holds family heirlooms. A lapis pendant, a chipped terracotta idol, and a very small tablet wrapped in cloth. It's a receipt for a debt repaid. 15 litres of beer owed, 15 returned, no interest taken. Beneath that, another tablet reads simply, paid, agreed, witnessed. It's signed with 2 styluses and a flourish of clay. You almost smile. Even 4 years ago, closing a tab felt satisfying. A child runs past, trailing a toy carved from bone. You notice a cracked tablet he left behind. It looks like a drawing of a goat and a smiling face. Maybe it's a record. Maybe it's just play. The line between documentation and doodling blurs when you're 5 and surrounded by clay. Back in the kitchen, the woman wraps leftover bread in cloth, handing it to an older man who leaves a small clay slip in return, essentially a food IOU. You wonder how many of these casual credits quietly structured neighborhood life. Alone. of onions here, a bundle of firewood there. They didn't need banks. They had memory, witnesses, and little hunks of baked mud. A quirky tradition appears in a few households. Some tablets are shaped like animals, pigs, cows, even frogs. While most scholars assume these were novelty receipts for livestock deals, there's a competing theory that they were part of family rituals. Perhaps a cow-shaped receipt served both as documentation and a prayer to keep the animal fertile. Or maybe someone just thought it was funny. You'd be surprised how often someone thought it was funny explains 90% of human history. You come across a receipt jar, a ceramic container filled with small tokens, each representing a trade or favor. Some are stamped with markings, others are color-coded. These objects didn't use writing but served the same purpose, a tangible memory of exchange. And unlike written receipts, these could be used by those who were illiterate, which back then meant most people. Historians still debate how literacy influenced household record-keeping. Were these folks taught by local scribes? Did they copy formats they saw at the market? Or was it more intuitive, just a natural extension of bartering with something concrete, to show for it? You watch a young couple sit in the doorway of their home, carving a joint receipt for shared fieldwork with another family. They pass the stylus between them like a secret handshake, each writing their mark. It's not elegant cuneiform, but it's legible. It means something, and it will be remembered. Just before you leave, you notice one final peculiar tablet. It's covered with dozens of tiny fingerprints, smudges from everyone in the household, all pressed into the same surface. Maybe it was a playful group project, or maybe it was a symbolic ledger, a way to record not a transaction, but a moment of agreement. You're not sure. No one is. But the print of a child's pinky alongside, a grandmother's wide thumb, makes you wonder how many family stories were told in clay. And in this small warm house, with its dry bread, shared water, and haphazard tablets, you realize that receipts were never just about buying and selling. They were tools for memory, fairness, and connection. They made promises visible, and, in the hands of everyday people, they kept the quiet machinery of life running one lentil at a time. You're almost there now, wading through the final dim corridors of memory and mud, where receipts evolve from practical records into something stranger and more poetic. This last stretch of your journey is dedicated to the legacy, how Mesopotamian receipts echo into later civilizations, slipping like threads into Egyptian scrolls, Roman ledgers, and the data-stained spreadsheets on your laptop screen. The clay under your feet feels different here, less trodden, quieter. You reach what resembles an ancient crossroads, paths that lead outward into Persia, Greece, Egypt, and beyond. And each of those paths carries with it a shard of the Mesopotamian system, sometimes intact, sometimes mutated. Your mainstream, historical fact. The concept of documenting economic transactions using physical records did not die with Mesopotamia. Egyptian scribes adopted papyrus for the same purpose, keeping receipts for grain deliveries, cattle counts, and taxes paid, in honey or linen. The Greeks kept wax tablets. The Romans developed detailed accounting systems with receipts known as chirographs, sometimes made in duplicate and stored separately, just like those Mesopotamian clay twins. You look around and start seeing ghosts of Mesopotamia in places you never expected. A wax tablet from a Roman merchant office bears a name that's almost Sumerian. A Phoenician scroll lists shipments of cedar in a style eerily similar to the old Akkadian block text format. It's like Mesopotamia whispered into the ears of every civilization that came next. Keep the records, trust the receipts. 1. Quirky, lovely tidbit. In medieval Florence, merchants revived the idea of physical transaction tokens, small lead seals or tied notes, not unlike the stamped envelopes used in Babylon 2 years earlier. Historians call it parallel evolution. You might call it same stress, different century. But historians still debate how much of Mesopotamian record-keeping was directly inherited versus independently rediscovered. Did ancient knowledge travel along trade routes and inspire? Or did the pressures of commerce just push every civilization toward the same boring but brilliant solution? Write it down or forget it. You duck under an archway and find yourself staring at the remnants of the Library of Ashurbanipal, where receipts lived alongside myths and omens, prayers and planetary charts. No hierarchy between fact and wonder. A record of 2 sheep sold sits beside an epic about the underworld. It's like finding an old grocery receipt wedged inside your favorite novel and realizing they both tell stories. The deeper you look, the more it becomes clear. Receipts were not static relics. They transformed. In Persia, administrative cuneiform gave way to Aramaic ink scripts. In Egypt, scribes on the Nile turned grain into tax rolls. And by the time empires sprawled across continents, receipts had become part of the political infrastructure. One clay tablet from the Neo-Babylonian period, unearthed in Sippar, includes both a purchase record and a note about the buyer's loyalty to the crown. Yes, patriotism and barley. A receipt with personality. In the background, the hum of commerce never stopped. From the bazaars of Damascus to the markets of Carthage, merchants invoked the same logic that once moved goats across Uruk's cobbled streets. You owe me. Here's proof. It's a deeply human thing, a blend of anxiety and organization. You reach a modern exhibit, climate-controlled, behind glass. A lone clay receipt rests on velvet. A description reads, "Read delivery to Temple Kitchen, Lagash, circa BCE." Next to it is a touchscreen, where a digitized version of the tablet can be rotated and translated. The irony? It's the only object in the room that doesn't need a power source to last another 4 years. Even today, the DNA of receipts is in everything. Your grocery total, your rideshare summary, your rent confirmation email. They're all echoes. Digitized descendants of cuneiform marks pressed by fingers long gone. A quirky modern echo. Some blockchain contracts use a concept eerily reminiscent of Mesopotamian record duplication, split, ledgers, public verification, and tokens stored offline. If the Sumerians could see a crypto wallet, they'd nod slowly and say, "Ah, yes, but where's the clay?" Historians still argue about the philosophical legacy of these ancient receipts. Were they the first evidence of bureaucracy, or the first attempt at fairness in human exchange? Was this the rise of control, or the birth of accountability? Either way, it's hard to escape the quiet poetry of it all. That the first thing we ever wrote down wasn't a poem, wasn't a prophecy, it was a line item, a count, a cost, proof that someone gave and someone received. And now, under your fingertips, you feel the resonance of it. Each small tablet was a promise kept, a deal done, a voice in the clay saying, "I was here. I mattered. I had barley to deliver." As you slowly back away from the tablet, your mind drifts. You imagine all the scribes, merchants, priests, and teenagers who etch their little moments into eternity. Not for glory, not for you, but for clarity, for peace of mind, because there's nothing quite so calming as knowing the numbers add up. Wind down. Final words. And now, as the last embers of Mesopotamian memory flicker out behind your eyes, you begin to soften, slowing your breath, sinking deeper into the folds of your blanket. The ancient streets of fade into shadow, their sounds growing quieter, muffled by the sands of time. The clay is cool beneath your hands now, and the weight of the tablets is gone. The noise of trade, scribes scratching away, and the distant bleating of livestock has melted into something much gentler, a low hum, steady as the rise and fall of your chest. You've walked through 5 years of bureaucracy tonight. You've seen what was written when writing was still young. Not kings and battles, but barley and bread. Not declarations of war, but grocery lists and IOUs. Somehow, it's all more comforting that way. The past doesn't need to shout to be remembered. Sometimes, it just leaves a small mark in clay, quietly saying, "This happened." And that's enough. So let your thoughts drift now, not into palaces or temples, but into small courtyards lit by oil lamps, where neighbors still trade dates for flour, and someone somewhere presses a stylus into soft earth for the very first time. Let the quiet carry you. Let the story dissolve. And let the gentle rhythm of history wrap around you like a warm breeze across ancient fields. Sleep easy. Now,